Okay, so going live, recording, launching on Twitch and Kick as well. All right. Thank you for joining me, everybody. I'm joined today with Michael Koretzky, the Regional Director for the Society of Professional Journalists. Or are you still a Regional Director?
I still am. It's, there's 12 regions. I'm region 3. It's all bureaucratic, but I'm the senior regional coordinator. I've been doing it longer than anyone else.
All right. Well, hey, congratulations. That's cool.
Not really. It doesn't come with any groupies or drugs or hotel rooms. It's not very glamorous.
I see. You do get to host conferences, which we're going to be playing muted in the background, though. The SPJ Airplay morning panel. It's available on YouTube if you haven't seen it already. This was Michael Koretzky's brainchild here. We're going to get, I'm sure, into like how this came to be in a minute. But I'll play this muted. If you want to see the full thing, I'll post a link in the description. But anyway, how you doing today, Michael?
Uh, I'm good. This is interesting because I haven't really thought about this until you reached out to me. So it's interesting all these years later what I remember about this, and it'll be interesting to see how those memories jive with yours.
Definitely, definitely. Now, we both engaged with GamerGate, but in very different capacities. I was obviously more of an activist and kind of like a dumb kid, but sometimes made really good arguments too. I won't shoot myself down too much. But I was an activist. You were a journalist who was hosting SPJ Airplay and wanted to explore what the heck this was.
Yeah, I was a little naive about that. I thought, oh, you know what? I'll spend a couple days doing this.
Oh no. I might be a bit naive too. I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna wrap this project up within a couple months, get all the interviews done in 2 months, maybe a few more months for editing, for the editing the transcripts down for book form. Am I way misguided on this?
I have never been. I've been involved in investigative journalism before that takes a lot longer than you think. I have never been involved in anything that was as big a time suck as Gamergate in my entire life. Not marriage, not work, nothing.
Yeah, well, don't feel too bad because it sucked away too many hours of my life too.
Well,
I,
I don't really, I didn't say I didn't enjoy it, but it was just like, it's very humbling because they thought, well, how hard could this be? And it's like renovating a bathroom. It's like, oh, Jesus, there's more to fix.
Now, please correct me if I have the timeline wrong here, but I believe this came about because the Society of Professional Journalists created a hashtag for Ethics Week. And a bunch of Gamergate people said, hey, we really care about ethics. Why don't you talk to us?
No, well, close. So what happened is SPJ has an ethics week, which is about as exciting as the American Dental Society having a flossing week. So, I mean, journalists are supposed to be ethical, but it's really, it's not sexy and fun. So they have this hashtag, usually goes unnoticed. I was serving on the national board of directors at the time, and the hashtag got bombed by a bunch of just weird shit using the Gamergate hashtag. And it was, well, the ones I remember most vividly were very well drawn, like comic book images of men dressed as Nazis peeing on other men and then filleting each other. And that freaked out some of the other more Midwestern conservative journalists on the board. And what does it have to do with ethics? And they said, let's just have nothing to do with it. They shut down the hashtag and there was no more ethics week. And I was like, well, I'm intrigued, journalistically quizzical. Like, let's act. I want to follow up with this. So I just did it on my own because no one else wanted to. I didn't know what Gamergate was. I actually looked up the hashtag and tried to read some other journalism on it. Found there was very scarce journalism, lots of opinion columns, which is one kind of journalism, but like that's like eating chocolate chip cookies for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's not. You need a balanced diet. So as I looked into it, the reason I actually got sucked into it was that as I was looking into it, I read a couple of columns, opinion pieces that said everyone involved in GamerGate is a misogynist, racist asshole, or whatever negative stereotype there was. Everyone is that way. And as a journalist, when I see the word everyone or hear the term all the time or hear about everyone on the right or everyone on the left, my antenna goes up because it's really easy to journalistically disprove that. All I got to do is find one. So that's why I started looking into it, just because it didn't seem to have any nuance. And when there is no nuance, that's the time that journalists can do their best work.
Well,
Doesn't mean they do that best work, but it means they could do their best work.
You went looking for the nuance. What did you find?
No nuance. Like, just, I think I said this even back then, that it was really weird that in Gamergate, if you pissed off the people in Gamergate, they would just bombard you with, just screeds and opuses and manifestos and research. It's like all this stuff. And the anti-Gamergate people, they would block you. So at a certain point, as the further down this road I got, I was only talking to one side because the other side wouldn't talk, which was akin to trying to interview, universities or politicians. They just sometimes just refuse to comment. So by default, I ended up talking more to Gamergate people. And I made this mistake. I remember Oliver Campbell had a stream, and he said, well, would you, and he was complaining about journalists like not listening. And I said, well, tell you what, I will go on your stream and I'll answer every goddamn question for as long as it takes. It took 6 hours. I was on his stream, and I think it's still posted somewhere. I was on that stream from 6 o'clock to midnight, answering every goddamn question. And at the end, he's like, do you want to come back next week? I'm like, more? So one reason we did Airplay was just to have an event in person under a theory, which I don't know is accurate, was there's all this trolling going on. No one knows who's doing it. It's really easy to troll online, and it's really hard to troll in person. And I think I said at the time that if they're going to try to troll us at Airplay, I guess they would show up wearing a paper bag over their head and peeing on somebody. But like, it's not going to have the same effect, It's like, who's that asshole peeing on another guy? Like, just have security escort them out. So at least for that, whatever else you can say about SPJ Airplay, at least it did cut through that level of bullshit.
Yeah, and they did, I guess, find some way to troll you still, didn't they, in real life?
No, you talking about the bomb threat?
Yeah.
That has to be the dumbest troll, the laziest troll ever, because they waited until like there's only an hour left anyway to call in the bomb threat. And they did it when Milo Yiannopoulos wouldn't shut the fuck up. So it was perfect, because the only way to shut up Milo Yiannopoulos is with a bomb threat.
Well, I did get a question from an anti-Gamergate person. The video, if you're watching the video, it might pause for a second, because anytime I alt tab, it'll pause the video. But I got a couple questions from an anti-Gamergate person, and one of them was about Milo. Were there any concerns over inviting Milo Yiannopoulos, someone who is widely considered a right-wing provocateur, to the event? Do you believe that his involvement hurt the perception of the event as a serious discussion? And that's not from me, that's from the anti-Gamergate person, who's in the chat, by the way.
I don't know. They might be right, but what's important to note is I didn't pick them. The one thing I found interesting about the more sane Gamergate people was just how legalistic they are. They're like, they would all be really great lawyers, because and I get the complaint, because I at the base of this, there's a truth that the gaming press didn't do a particularly bang up job. But to organize this there was a legitimate concern from GamerGate side. And again, anti-GamerGate just refused to come or talk to me, or they would block me even before I even reached out to them. So I guess I was on that block list or whatever. But the GamerGate crowd was, we don't want you, an idiot, picking the panelists. And I said, you're right. Journalists are not the people to be doing that. You guys will pick who will represent you, and I'll try to get the anti-GamerGate people to pick who will represent them. But then it became an issue. Well, who in the GamerGate audience is going to do the picking? Because the big problem with this whole thing journalistically and caused most of these problems is there's no membership card. In SPJ, you pay some dues and you get a number. And that's how you're a member of SPJ. If you're a mainstream journalist, you work at a mainstream outlet, you have an author page, and you know who that is. No one could tell me who was who in GamerGate. So I had to pick a panel to pick the panel. That was controversial. So then I advertised, well, who should be on this panel to pick the panel? Some GamerGate people had contacted me that have a panel to pick the panel to pick the panel. I was like, that's just too navel-gazing and meta for me. So I said, well, look, I'm going to pick the people based on who I talk to. So like Oliver Campbell and some other people. Alum Bakari was one of the more rational Breitbart people I talked to. So they had a panel, and then and one thing I admired about the GamerGate side is the level of transparency. Journalists highly value transparency. So the panel to pick the panel were all live streamed and recorded and commented on and chewed over. So they picked Milo Yiannopoulos. I thought that was kind of a weird play. Like, if you are trying to make your argument, why him? And I think the problem is, and it was then and still might be now with similar online movements, is I kept trying to tell both sides that this event is not for either side. Like, you're not going to convince anyone pro or anti-GamerGate at this point, because by the time I got involved, the trenches were dug, right? There ain't going to be any peace until there's a lot more bloodshed. I'm not going to change that. You are going to participate in SPJ Airplay for everyone else. Remember, Airplay happened during a journalism conference in Miami. So there were, in the other building next door, there were classrooms. It was a center, a historic center, and had classrooms and had the theater. We were in the theater. And then there were sessions going on about data journalism, how to report this, how to report that. And a lot of those people came over for parts of Airplay. And the idea was to talk to them. And that's why I think the funniest moment of the whole thing was in the very beginning, and you already showed it, where I had this woman from Atlanta, a journalist from Atlanta, Sharon Dunton. She stood up, and I dragged her over, and I said to the morning panel, to the GamerGate 3 people on the panel, this is Sharon Dunton. She's an award-winning journalist in Georgia. She's a mom. She has no idea what this is. She was here for the journalism conference. Explain GamerGate to her. 3 people couldn't do it. And because I would turn to her and say, do you understand that? And she's like, I'm trying. Like, is it, so it's a hashtag thing? Like, and that was the kickoff of the whole thing. If you can't explain it to average people who know nothing about it, it's not their fault.
Well, that's the job of a journalist, though, is to try and figure it out. And I think that look, I wrote a book on it. People did serious. Well, okay. Do you want me to try and give you a definition, I guess, on the fly?
I would love that. And the definition, as I told Oliver Campbell, can't take 6 hours.
Well, if a journalist can't spend 6 hours doing research, they shouldn't be a journalist.
No, that's true. They can they can spend a lot more time than that. The problem is that, and I remember saying this multiple times during the heat of the moment, that journalists have a bunch of stories they can do because there's no shortage of good news corruption, feature, human drama to cover. Journalists, if a journalist tells you like, dude, I got nothing to write about, they aren't very good journalists. There's usually a long list of things you want to get to, and the stress of your job is knowing you're never going to get to every good story. So you have to choose. And the whole thing about Gamergate I was trying to distill was tell me the elevator pitch. Sell me on why this story should be covered. What is it about? And the problem, I already just told you, like when I ran against the Gamergate crowd, they were very legalistic, is that any attempt to sum it up, any summary is going to obviously leave out a lot of details and nuance, but it gets you started, right? It's like a movie trailer. It's not the whole freaking movie, but it's like, I want to see that movie. And then the movie unfurls as you go and explains as you go. Gamergate crowd couldn't even agree on a summary because the summary was going to leave out some detail that they thought was important to them. And I'm like, it's not about you. You have to sum it up for someone else, even if it doesn't get everything across. That's how you suck them into the story, and then they want to learn more. But I had either it was my fault or whatever, but with a significant portion of the Gamergate crowd, I could never get that point across. And I tried different tacks to do that, and it just never worked with some of them.
I guess on the fly, again, I didn't prepare for this, so I'm winging it. Different people will have different definitions, but I think the two main components of Gamergate were ethics in games journalism and artistic freedom for game developers and artists. Though some people would later on try to adopt a generalized culture war attitude and try and put that in there as well. And also some people had other ideas. There were small niche factions that had ideas like, oh, well, this should be about combating loot boxes and microtransactions and these other industry practices that we don't like. But that was a pretty small faction. I think that for the most part, everybody either cared about ethics or creative freedom, or later on, for better or worse, some people were culture warriors. And I think that the reason it's difficult and you have like all these things thrown together is because the people that were attacking Gamergate, including the games journalists themselves in some cases, were all kind of involved in most of these different aspects, right? The games journalists were in some cases corrupt. Not always. Not all games journalists were corrupt, but some were corrupt. And they were also like bought into this weird social justice ideology, which is like fine. They have the right to their opinion, of course. But like that ideology would also lead them to be like, you need to take this out of the video game. It's sexist. You're causing real world harm in society by having this in there. We're going to get me and our 5,000 followers on Twitter to all send emails and tweets at the developer to demand that this be removed. So the same people who were opposed to us like also had like this weird conflagration of different ideas. And that's why it merged together into this weird clusterfuck.
But that's their look. That's their right. If they want to, if Arnita Sarkeesian wants to trash game or the characters in games, that's her right. She can go on her stream, she can do it, and you can post a video deconstructing why she's full of shit. That's not the issue to me. If they want to trash, if they want to declare an end of gaming as we know it, that's their freedom of speech. It's a private entity, right? Their media outlet, they own it, they run it. Start your own media outlet. Hell, shit, a lot of Gamergate people did, and I thought that was great. And then the anti-Gamergate crowd was like, those fuckers are lying. Well, that's their freedom of speech. Jesus Christ. Here's what pissed me off was there were cases. I think at Airplay, probably the most important lesson may not be the one that resonates with the Gamergate crowd, but it does with the journalism crowd, is you had two journalists at that thing that are pretty notable and respectable. Lynn Walsh was the incoming president of National SPJ, and Randall Forum works at the Poynter Institute, which is like a continuing education place for good journalists. Bad journalists don't go there, obviously. And they both agreed that there were some cases that were presented by the Gamergate audience, and we didn't take your word for it. We actually looked that shit up, where you had gaming journalists hanging out with or dating game developers and not disclosing. You can do almost anything as long as you disclose it. But otherwise, it's like gaming journalism at the time of GamerGate was about as shitty as music journalism was in the 1960s, when music journalists would try to sleep with the lead singer of a band by writing about them. Like that's not ethical. That's bullshit. So what pissed me off had nothing to do with the opinions. To this day, I work with someone at my job who just hates Arnita Sarkeesian, and we still talk about gaming just because of all this GamerGate stuff, and it just kind of becomes an office conversation wherever we run across each other. And he hates her so much. He talks about the Unreal Engine and the whole thing, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, that's her opinion, man. Don't watch her, or do your own thing. I have no problem with anybody saying the GamerGate is shit or whatever. What I have a problem with is not their opinion, is when they try to write things that aren't opinion. That's where they fucked up.
Yeah, I probably disagree with Anita Sarkeesian on some things. Like that's fine. Like you said, that's freedom of speech. I agree 1,000%, and I think most GamerGate people would agree with that. But maybe Oron Darklord who I interviewed like last week, he would say, this is his view, not mine, that because she's saying that they cause real world harm and promote real world sexism, that this in and of itself carries with it some very negative baggage that could possibly lead to censorship. That's not my argument, that's his argument. What do you think of that?
Who's going to do the censoring based on Arnita Sarkeesian's opinion? So you're saying is he saying that YouTube would then hear Arnita's opinion and then ban people or demonetize people based on that? Because if that's the case, my problem isn't with Arnita Sarkeesian, it would be with YouTube.
No, he would say, I think, again, he's not here to defend himself, and I shouldn't like argue like his
No, but
views
you're
for
trying
him,
to make an argument. I'm not attacking him
yeah.
either. I'm just trying to understand his
Yeah,
argument.
I think he would say that because she's saying if you have games like Hitman where you shoot women and it gives you extra points, which I think wasn't actually true, which was like a major controversy at the time. The game didn't actually reward that; it actually deducted points from you. I don't fucking know. I don't play Hitman, but that's what people said, and that because she's saying, oh, this causes like real world sexism and sexist attitudes to be proliferating in the world due to cultivation theory, that because she's saying stuff like that, that the developers should be like, oh god, we're harming people in the real world. We got to do. It's kind of a dumb argument. I don't agree with him there. Whatever. But what I
Well,
think is better.
here's what I find funny. So I tried to talk to Arnita Sarkeesian. We had a very brief email exchange before she just refused to talk to me. And she reminded me very much of a story that I had done years earlier. And I don't know if I'm dating myself at this point, but do you remember Jack Thompson?
Yes.
Well, I interviewed him because he lived down here in Miami. So I interviewed him during one of his many lawsuits trying to get rid of Grand Theft Auto. And I did that for a magazine down here, Miami Magazine. So it was a regional publication. It wasn't even a national story. But I interviewed him at the Miami club, and we sat on the 21st floor and had lunch, and he was cutting a brownie with a fork and telling me about how Grand Theft Auto was corrupting a generation because you could run over a hooker and it was better to kill her. And I tried to talk to him. I asked him if he read comic books when he was a kid. He knew exactly where I was going with this. And he said, that's different. Comic books are different. This is video. It's immersive. So basically, this is an argument that goes back to the 50s, right? Which is, I read comic books when I was a kid, and I'm not a serial killer. So, and I know I volunteer as the advisor of a student newspaper at a university down here on Fridays. I will go to, my work gives me time off. I go and advise a bunch of college kids, been doing it for 2 decades. They play all sorts of video games. None of them have actually ever run over a hooker. So my argument against Anita Sarkeesian is you can make the point, and I don't argue that you might have some interesting analysis. I will argue the result. If it's your opinion that playing these games with big-breasted women is going to somehow affect the outcome, then you have to prove that, because it is yet to be proven from comic books through video games. That is the argue that was the discussion that I wanted to have with her, and I never could. So that, again, her opinion about that is valid. You can argue it. You should argue it if you don't agree with it, but you shouldn't try to dox her or harass her. I don't. I got into a lot of shit with GamerGate people because I just said very calmly and very blanketly, I don't think Zoe Quinn should be harassed. I don't think Brianna Wu should be harassed. I did talk to Brianna Wu. We had, she actually got involved. She said, and she told me that she was getting shit for talking to me. But I also don't believe the conspiracy theories because I got lots of emails with photos showing me why Zoe Queen wasn't really harassed and why Brianna Wu wasn't really harassed. And yeah, if they maybe exaggerated some of that, fine, because we're not really objective about ourselves, but they weren't zero harassed. And I challenged the GamerGate crowd to say, across the board, no, that's awful. And that was always a really hard thing for them to do. This thing got so weaponized and so personal that you couldn't even, it was even hard to admit, I don't want my enemies to be harassed at all. It's not a good thing in any sense. Like the most benign harassment is still uncalled for. That was really hard to get them to admit. And it was really hard to get them to admit that because they said, how come you're not attacking the other side if you're attacking us? And I said, well, that gets back to what I said before. I can't talk to them. They blocked me. I mean, that's what they do. Their whole thing is they don't harass you. They just ignore you. They don't want to have the conversation at all. So it's just a different personality trait in each group. And I don't approve of either one, but one of those traits is worse than the other. Because if you ignore me, I get to go on with my life. If you harass me, suddenly I got stress and worry. And I don't think that's justified over a bunch of opinions.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if somebody harassed you, I think that's bad. I think it's bad if somebody harasses like Anita Sarkeesian or whoever too. I don't support that anyway. I think most of us, maybe you disagree. I think most of us were like pretty good about like condemning harassment if it happened. Like if you look like when Brianna Wu, like she did get actually harassed. There was a third party troll. I don't say the trolls' names because that gives them the attention they want. But there was a third party troll who was sending her pictures of guns, and this guy wasn't associated with us at all. Over 50 GamerGate people on Twitter mass reported it. You can actually, you can still, I can link you the archive. It's still up. And then there have been studies too that show that like the vast majority of people didn't engage in harassment. Like obviously anyone online is going to receive like some degree of hate, especially if you're a massive public figure. But I don't think our community like generally made excuses, be like, oh well, it's okay if we harass you because you're mean to us or whatever.
I hope that's true. I mean, maybe I just got a lot of the really reflexively defensive emails and like, conversations about that. And I find this to be true everywhere. I mean, some things are unique to Gamergate. Some things Gamergate thinks is unique to them and it isn't. So I had told, I think, Milo and Alam Bakari when we were talking once that this whole thing about the harassment element, about whether you condemn it enough or you don't, reminds me of me. I'm Jewish. I was bar mitzvahed in Israel, right? I support Israel. But I also think, like back then especially, there was some shit going on where some Israeli soldiers like just kind of executed the Palestinians. And I'm like, we should fucking condemn that shit. And a bunch of my fellow Jews were like, we can't say, anti-Semitism is such a problem. We need to, circle the wagons and not say anything. And like, that is not the right attitude. Like, and then it's like, oh, but what of our history? What about the Germans? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this. This is bad. We should condemn it, especially because we went through all that shit. Like, this is wrong. We should say it's wrong. So I think anytime you get to an issue that it goes on for a long time and it gets so personal and you get so set in your ways, it's pretty hard to give any ground. And at certain points, this whole thing in Gamergate reminded me so much of trying to tell my Goyim friends about like Israel, Palestine. It's like, well, you have to go back 2,000 years. Let me explain some shit to you. Got a couple hours? before it really sinks in. It reminded me of Gamergate. Well, Koretzky, we got to go back 3 months, and then you have to read this, entire letter that was poorly written about Zoe Quinn. And yeah, it's kind of shitty in places, but you got to get the gist of it and the cultural moment of it. And then, yeah, the harassment's bad, but you got to understand what's happening here and why we're so aggrieved. Jesus Christ. Like, there's a reason that no one wanted to hear about Gamergate, and today no one wants to hear about Israel and Palestine.
Well, I do want to push back a bit. I know, obviously, I'm not going to deny your lived experiences. There were people in Gamergate who were bad actors. I don't deny that one way at all. But I think that when the media covers this and says, like, oh, it's a harassment camp, that's what Wikipedia says. It's a harassment campaign and a conspiracy theory. But I mean, when I was involved, like looking at the things that we did, right? If you engaged in like harassment, like Ethan Ralph, for instance, did engage in harassment, and he got banned from our forums. His website was blacklisted on our communities. You couldn't even link to it. And we had a harassment patrol. When two people who were critical of Gamergate got doxxed, we had hundreds of upvotes on our communities saying, "Hey, look, we don't support this at all. We don't know who did this. Well, we hope that they get found by the police and whatever." Like we were very much, and when that troll did send death threats, like we did over 50 people on Twitter were mass reporting it and saying like mass report this, including like some e-celebs, like other people too. Like I don't know, like what
No,
what more could
look,
we do?
I agree with you. In fact, one of the reasons I kept going with this was that I talked to a guy at Slate that was covering this. I talked to some other journalists I knew. Um, I got that narrative right that like this is a harassment campaign and the Wikipedia page is shit, but it's Wikipedia. Like I hate when people tell me like that those journalists have fucked it up on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not journalism. Um, so I get that, and my defense of Gamergate against the journalists that wrote really shitty opinion columns was you should at least be more nuanced, because I've met a number of people that are not harassing and have spoken out against harassment. And then the response would be, well, they haven't spoken loud enough. And that is another straw man that everybody uses. I mean, how come Muslims don't speak out against the violence of their religion? A lot of them do, but they don't have a freaking microphone. They're not on CNN. Like, you can go back and look it up. They're doing, for their 50 followers, they are condemning shit. So my argument was there were lots of Gamergate people that didn't have a megaphone that were, upset about this. And I'm going to be I know I'll get trashed for this, but what I found, and I never said this before, is, first of all, I heard that this was mostly a male movement, like boys living in their basements, sexually frustrated, whatever the stereotype paint the picture. I met a lot of women that were involved in this. Talk to them on the phone, and not just via like computer conversations. They were the ones that were more sensitive to harassment because in their daily lives, whatever their beliefs growing up, they had experienced something, some guy groping them, whatever, and had made them a little more sympathetic to even people they fucking hated getting harassed. So it was this really weird disconnect talking to these women. I remember one of them talking to her on the phone, and she was like not crying necessarily, but you could tell her voice was kind of cracking as she was decrying harassment in general. And she even said like, "I fucking hate Zoe Quinn." And like, I never, it took me a while to understand where that's coming from, but they did decry, like she should not be harassed at all. I compared that to the journalists that I was reading, the opinion columnists anyway, and I didn't jive. It didn't mesh. And part of the problem was the gaming press has this really weird thing where you can write a news story one day and then an opinion the next day. And in mainstream media, for whatever anyone thinks of mainstream media, mainstream media is like Congress. Like, you hate Congress, but you kind of like your congressman. Like, hey, well, he does a good job. He brings jobs down here. But fuck Congress. I hate the fuckers. Like, I hate the mainstream media, but I like this guy. I like the guy that writes this. in the real world, in the mainstream media, if you're a reporter, you are not a columnist. You write a story, but you do not write an opinion about that story. In the gaming journalism world, I was watching a bunch of them at Kotaku like write a story about this and then write an opinion column calling out the shit in their story. And then they would go back and write a news story and be pissed off at the comments on their news story. Like, dude, this is why there's a separation of church and state between opinion writers and news reporters, because what happened to you is your fault. So that's the weird part to me, that I met some good people. I met some assholes, and it's like everything else. The problem was that some in the media, especially the gaming press, were covering it like they were all assholes. And I still get shit to this day from other journalists, if they remember that time, like, how could you stick up for that misogynistic movement? And like, I wasn't sticking up for the misogynistic movement. Those guys are assholes. I was sticking up for all the other people who didn't have the bigger microphone and didn't do the trolling, because you didn't do any reporting to find those people. I don't know if any of that made sense.
No, it did. It's frustrating because I was like a major player in GamerGate. I mean, not, obviously the movement is, we prefer to go by like, oh, we're all leaders, none of us are leaders, but like, insofar as there were like people who you could discern as being like hubs of activity, like I ran the GamerGate Discord server. Ran a YouTube channel with 2,000 subscribers talking about this all the time, hundreds of videos, hundreds of live streams. Was involved in the GamerGate Investigatory Commission, which I created and founded. That didn't really work out in the end, but like I was involved with a ton of this stuff, and I only got approached by one person, and it was a college newspaper. It's like, why didn't the New York Times or CNN or somebody reach out if they're going to write
Well,
about
first,
us?
before I answer that, I will answer that for you. But I want to know, like, so how did it go with the college journalist?
We had a really civil conversation, except I'm not sure he ever actually wrote the article because I don't remember him ever like sending it to me after the fact. I don't know if
Oh,
his
son of a
editor
bitch.
stopped him or what, but like he was totally civil and cool, and we talked for like an hour and a half or something.
Well, I'll tell you why the New York Times and these places, whenever they did cover Gamergate, the what's called traditional media, like the older, like 100-year-old publications, the problem is, it's not that they just didn't understand Gamergate. They don't understand technology. Like, here's the problem. It's like most companies. If you're an editor at the New York Times, you're probably my age. You're in your 50s, right? You've been a reporter, and you don't know shit about technology except what your kids do. And then you have some reporter, some cub reporters in their 20s, say, hey, man, we should cover this online movement. You're like, I have no idea what that is. Go back and cover the city commission meeting. Talk to me about the congressional hearing on boringness, and let's write a story about that, because I understand that. So a lot of times, it's not a conspiracy. I think there's an old expression, never attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. So the reason the mainstream media didn't cover this is they didn't understand it, nor did they want to. And when they did cover it, they would assign it, and I actually counted this shit. They would assign it to their quote unquote culture writer. And a culture writer is just the fluffiest, amorphous job at any newspaper, because you write about culture. And like, what is culture? You get to define what you're going to write about, because there's no it's not like you cover city commission. Well, I know what that is. I got to go there and write about what's happening in that city. No, I'm going to write about culture. And there's always some 25-year-old elitist Columbia School of Journalism grad, Northwestern grad, who then, who Googled it, found all the other culture articles about this, thought that was a pretty sharply written opinion, and cribbed it. And you could actually tell. It's sort of like how biblical historians go back and like look at the various uh, gospels and figure out which ones were written first by which one cribbed which language. I could actually go back and read some of the opinion columns by these so-called culture writers, culture columnists, and see how they picked up phrases. So it starts with the gaming press. It starts with a Kotaku or a Paragon, and it works its way up to like a Slate magazine. And then that gets picked up into a Jezebel. And then that gets picked up into the New York Times. And it's the laziest kind of reporting. So the real question about Gamergate that I don't know the answer to, and I would actually be interested in anyone else's opinion, is if the journalism had been done right from the beginning, what would have been different about Gamergate?
It probably would have happened.
You don't think it would have happened at all, really?
Yeah, I don't. I think that the thing that blew this up, and people have different definitions of when GamerGate began, but I think the thing that made this into like a massive, massive thing with hundreds of thousands of people, or at least several tens of thousands with like hundreds of thousands who were moderately interested in it, was this gamers are dead articles. I think that that's what did it. I think that that's what blew this up into a massive thing. Now, obviously, Adam Baldwin did use the hashtag prior to that, like the day before. Um, and there were some minor controversies about video games journalism and drama and stuff like that, including like the Zoe Quinn drama, which obviously I think a lot of that stuff is none of our business unless it involves Nathan Grayson. Um,
Yeah, don't
that's
get me
not a,
started on
yeah,
that.
that doesn't, obviously, there were people talking about like internet drama and whatever, and like moderate some controversies in the games press, but gamers are dead articles. That's I think what like blew this massive up. You don't have, and that's because of bad journalism, right? That's because either these publications, I mean, 10 articles on one day, an additional 9 articles within the next few days. That's kind of sus.
Well, but no, I mean, it is, there's obviously some coordination going on. I have no problem with them doing that. I have a problem with how they reacted to what happened. I had many conversations with Stephen Totillo after this, more than during it, and actually had him as a keynote speaker at a college media convention in Manhattan that I'd done the following year. And you know, we had several heated arguments, not because of what Kotaku wrote, but how Kotaku handled the response to what they wrote. I think Kotaku actually journalistically was a sound publication under Stephen. I think the problem was the excuses he made for his reporter dating a source, which is just one of the hugest violations. And then the defensiveness over the response. So, look, I think nothing is worse than a whiny journalist. I just think you dish it out, you got to be able to take it. Not the harassment, obviously that's always uncalled for, but I'm talking about, hey, your fucking article sucks. What are you guys doing? You're wrong about this. This coordination is terrible. You guys mix opinion and news all the time, and I'm pissed at you. And I had no problem at all with boycotts. I think boycotts are democracy in action. I don't care if it's from the left or the right. If you want to, and I think you actually sent me something about this, but if you want to lead a boycott and get advertisers not to advertise, that is a way to really hit the media where they live. It would be nice if it was just the journalistic argument, but really it always comes down to money. So he and I had a lot of arguments about that because I had no problem with with the boycotts and with the contacting of advertisers and fuck Doritos and all that stuff. So I had no problem with them having a concerted effort to tell all of you guys that you're wrong. I would have appreciated journalistically and ethically if they would have announced, hey, you know what? We all got together, Polygon, whatever, and we're going to do this thing and this is our opinion. The right way to do that would be, we're going to do this all in one day, and then we want to hear from you. And they would run opinion columns from people disagreeing. Whatever you might say about the New York Times or the Washington Post, and I know some of your listeners probably hate those publications, they actually run opinions on their opinions page that run counter to the shit they ran the day before. So they will have liberal Robert Reich, and the next day they'll have conservative David Brooks talk about the same issue. Now they'll have their own opinion, the editorial page thing, the bigger type that says the New York Times believes this. But my biggest complaint about the gaming journalism industry was they ran their fucking opinions in between their news stories, and then they never let you guys run a conflicting opinion. So you might be right that like no one gets, really mad until they're not heard. So that was I mean, they had the total right to shut you out. That's their business. They can do whatever the hell they want. But it wasn't very smart.
Do you think some people would say that because GamerGaters claim to care about free speech, that by running advertiser campaigns against these supposedly corrupt websites was anti-free speech, especially since in one specific instance, some advertisers pulled out because some GamerGate people emailed them because one of the Gawker writers claimed that bullying was good and he wanted to bring back bullying.
I
And
remember
that's an
that.
opinion, right? That's a guy's opinion. Doesn't he have the right to support bullying and advocate for people to bully people? Isn't that
Sure, he
just an
does.
opinion?
And then you have the right to take it out on him because it's a stupid fucking opinion. But no, he has. Look, you can if you want to. Richard, I defended Richard Spencer speaking at my alma mater, University of Florida, to such a degree that I contacted his attorney and said that as part of, because that's within my region of SPJ, that I would support him being able to speak at University of Florida. I would also support people not going. Um, but if you ban him, then who do you ban next? It's a slippery slope. It's not worth it. So no, you have the right to do that. The advisor boycotts are not an impingement on free speech. They're your free speech. You are just speaking. You aren't making the decision. The brands have to decide that they've heard your speech and don't want to do this anymore. If you're threatening the brand, that's different. If you're harassing the brand, that's different. If you are contacting advertisers and saying, do you know where your dollars are going? Do you even read this shit? Because most of them don't. And then they find out and they realize this is controversial now. It's going to cost me money. I'm going to piss off some of my customers. I'm not going to do this anymore. You haven't done anything against free speech. You've exercised your free speech. They have made a business decision. When you coerce them into that decision, that's different. You don't have the power to coerce them. You're not firebombing their home. You're not saying you're going to cut their salary. You're saying, I'm not going to buy your product anymore. That's
Well,
that's your right.
well, hang on though. But like, wouldn't someone take the devil's advocate argument and say that by making it so bullying, the advocacy for bullying is a toxic opinion, and by making it cost them money, you're creating a chilling effect in the journalism industry, in the media industry, where now people are going to be less likely to advocate for bullying in the future, and that is sort of silencing speech to an extent.
The market the market silences speech. I mean, I mean, to me, if you have power to compel someone to do something, then you could possibly bully them. You do not have the power to convince Doritos to do anything. Frito Lay is going to, you don't have, the only power you have is to contact them and say, have you seen this? It offends me. I hope it offends you. And if it doesn't offend them, they're going to go on advertising and your speech fell on deaf ears. If they agree with you, then you just did essentially some journalism. You told them, this is why I'm not going to buy your product. Here is what was said that I don't agree with. If Frito Lay's agrees with it, they'll keep advertising. If they don't, they won't. I don't see how that is harassment. I don't see how that rises to the level of delivering a death threat to Zoe Quinn. Those are two totally different things. One is ethical and is speaking truth to power, and the other is illegal and immoral.
You might disagree with my, I think, stronger argument than Noron's Dark Lord's opinion on creative freedom. So I want to hear what you think of this. My argument at the time, and I guess now still, would be that if you get a large number of people on social media to engage in a campaign, a concerted effort to pressure, that's a loaded word perhaps, but pressure game developers into taking a specific thing out of their game, or a comic book company into changing the cover because you think the cover is bad, does that rise to the level of creating a chilling effect where it's like, oh shit, okay, we can't do covers like this anymore on games because people are going to launch this hashtag campaign, change the cover, whatever, to try and harass us into changing it? Or perhaps just put pressure, public pressure, on us to change it. And we don't want that bad PR. So we're not going to make games like this anymore. We're going to take these elements out. We're going to change the cover of the comic book, whatever. Do you think that that is stifling of free speech or creating a chilling effect on artists?
Yeah, I remember Derek Smart was at. We had him as the third panelist on the journalist side because he'd done some journalism, and we wanted an independent game developer. And you know, he said that he was scared for his business. Um, but that, I mean, if the one thing that's the advantage of all that, what you just described, is if you want to really be an indie game designer, that means doing things that the big boys don't and make the games the way you fucking want to make them. And if enough people buy it, you don't have to care what they say. So I don't think it's harassment to say we don't want these covers on the game. It's up to the brands to figure out a way to, if I'm an independent game developer and I saw the Gamergate movement have as many people involved as it did, I would make games for them. And maybe it won't sell as many as a mainstream game, but it'll be artistic and interesting and edgy. To me, look, this is no different than Campbell's Soup. I don't know. Do you know the story of Campbell's Soup? Do you know why Campbell's Soup is the number one soup in the world?
No.
It's because it's really bland. Because 100 years ago, the Campbell Soup Company figured something out. There used to be all these different kinds of soup, and they were spicy and saucy and thick or whatever. And some people don't like that. And they figured out that if you made the least offensive liquid, that the people that like spicy food will still eat it in a pinch, but people who don't like spicy food are going to eat it all the time. And even though no one's going to like it, everyone's going to buy it. And I think what's happening in the gaming industry since Gamergate and some of the gaming people that I talk to that lament the recent changes in gaming is that it's the Campbell Soupization of games. I mean, games, they all run on the same fucking engines. The what makes a better game is infinitesimally smaller than it used to be. So now they're all just chasing the Campbell Soup model until there's somebody that comes along and sells something spicier and creates their own niche. And then what, of course, will happen, this is America, they'll get bought out by the big Campbell Soup companies and they'll just get adapted. Campbell Soup also makes good soup under different labels that aren't Campbell's. So I'm pretty sure what'll happen is the Derek Smarts of tomorrow are going to be able to make the games that are reactionary against what you don't like. And then they'll get bought out by the big companies, but you won't really know that they're bought out. You don't know everything that's owned by Procter and Gamble. So I don't see this as a free speech issue. I see it as a entrepreneurial capitalism issue. And I think you have every right to exercise your free speech to affect capitalism because God knows rich people are doing it to you.
So obviously you got some flack for SPJ Airplay. Was it worth it?
Oh yeah. The only moment that I regretted it was the moment Oliver Campbell called me a racist. Because I felt like, kind of like that guy. I still do. I mean, we got over it. We talked it out. But there was like this butthurt moment where like things weren't going exactly the way, leading up to Airplay, the way that some people wanted it to be. So it got really heated. And I think it was because, I mean, I could be calm about it because I'm just parachuting in and hear a bunch of people living this shit for months and months. But still, that was the only low point. The rest of it, so that was the only part that I was like kind of depressed because I've been called a racist before, but usually not by people I like. Um, and then the only frustrating moment was listening to Milo rant on for literally 10 minutes straight. Um, and that was frustrating because we had a conversation, me, him, and Alama Bakari beforehand, where I said, "You're not going to do that, right?" And he's like, "No, I'm going to be, I'll answer your questions, everything." Because I told all the panelists, "Look, we're doing this journalistically. You get asked a question, try to keep it responsive if you can to 2 minutes. And if it can't, actually tell the audience, like, I just need a little more time to explain this because we want everyone to talk. And he just actually steamrolled everyone. And everyone in the audience was yelling at me to let him talk. And I'm like, dude, he's not letting the other panelists talk. This isn't about me as much as it's about the two people sitting next to him having no opportunity to say anything. So that was the most frustrating moment. And so when the bomb threat happened, I was like, oh, thank God, a bomb threat.
It's funny you say that too, because I was interviewing someone a couple days ago. I don't remember who said it exactly. I've interviewed so many people in the past few days. I've been like cramming this stuff through, like crazy to try and get it done. But and they were saying that it was glad that they were glad that they weren't glad that bomb threat happened, but they said they were joking and they were like, well, it's kind of a good thing the bomb threat happened because it shut up Milo or something like that.
But the funny thing is that, like, I was on Milo's show before, and I've interviewed him since for something, and he's actually a really smart dude, just chasing the dragon. And I even told him, I said, dude, if you ever just applied yourself to something you actually believed in, you might actually be dangerous. You're articulate, you're funny, you're smart, but you're kind of a dick. And um, that was I don't know what he was hoping to get out of that. I don't know that he ever really cared about the issues you cared about,
Oh, not at all.
but he was picked by a panel of people, and in all the comments, I guess they probably picked him for that panel because they thought he would be kind of their mercenary warrior that would defend their point. And really, for 10 minutes, he didn't talk about gaming at all. He talked about women's rights. He talked about his issues. So it was really the most frustrating part was not having him talk so much, was looking in the crowd and having the pro GamerGate crowd say, shut up, let him talk. And I'm like, dude, he's not talking about anything that's representing you right now. Are you actually listening to what he's saying? So that was really frustrating.
Yeah, I don't use the word grifter very much, but I think it probably applies in this specific instance. I mean, like if you look at his like trajectory, he was like he went from being like a basic bitch conservative, like no offense, like I'm not against conservatives or anything, but like he was like a normal conservative, then he was like a gamer gater, and then he was like a liberalist, he called himself briefly. A classical liberal, and then he became like a far right dude, and then he became like a Christian nationalist. That's his current branding. I recently did a video criticizing him, um, maybe like a month and a half ago, and like he's just now he's like he's if you look at him now he's fallen so far. And
Well, so
he
why
used to be like a smart-ish guy. He used to be like maybe he still is. I don't know. But like he was like on the stage like yeah we gotta kill people who disagree with us and we need to only have we need to make America a Christian theocracy to return to the 13th century. Like, he's like a crazy guy. He's like completely nuts.
Barry Fuentes and yeah. Well, so why do you think Gamergate proponents picked him?
Well, I think that there's
Because it
probably a
wasn't
couple
just a
different
few of
reasons.
them; it was a lot of them in the
That
comments, in the chats, in the streams. They really wanted him. So it wasn't like 5 people that wanted him; it was like
no,
100.
no. I think that within a faction of GamerGate, Milo is very popular. That wasn't really the faction
Why?
I was a part of, but he was seen as this agent provocateur who's going to go in there and destroy the anti-gamergaters and the social justice warriors and like I mean I see the appeal of that. And he used to be like a smart-ish guy. Um so I mean I see the appeal. And my own personal position as someone who was like very much plugged into this stuff was that I think he's probably a grifter, but as long as he doesn't violate any of our ethical rules, the same standards we would apply to any other publication, we should allow him to exist, basically, in this space. But then
So,
once the pedophile thing came out, I had to condemn him, and I did rightly so.
I don't know. I mean, I just really wonder if he believes anything he says. But what's so funny is Alum Bakari, who was also from Breitbart, he was, I mean, he's a calm guy. He's more libertarian than right. And he really did care because he was the one I dealt with the most for pro Gamergate, like organizing it. And he wasn't egotistical about it or esalab, which is a term I did not know when I started this. But he didn't even want to be on the panel. Like they kind of drafted him. He just wanted to help organize the panel to pick the panel. So he really did believe a lot of the things that you believe, and we would debate those for hours sometimes. But I never understood. I understood some of the other people on the panels. I did not understand the Milo choice, and it did strike me that that was a victory for the GamerGate people that maybe cared about GamerGate, but were there because at the time that's where you went if you were anti-social justice warrior. That's just where you were. And what I found really funny about that is that there's a faction of GamerGate people I met who were pro-social justice in other facets except gaming. And then there were some that were in GamerGate because they were against all social justice. And I always found that interesting because like I would ask them, like, what is social justice to you? Like, what does that mean? And it was always an interesting definition because at some level, everyone is for some social justice. It's like, it's a stupid social justice warrior is just a stupid name catch-all for that. So
People we don't
trying
like,
to parse that was funny.
ideas we don't like. That's what.
Yeah, it's actually what it is. Like
Yeah.
that's essentially. So I had to always argue, argue with GamerGate people because just like every other group, I'm like, well, what are you against? Social justice warriors. What's that mean? And then we have to then we're arguing about their definitions. We have to do that before we get back to the central point. For those who were most upset about the journalism, that's what I was on board with. And I had several discussions with other journalists that had written things against GamerGate, gamer journalists. Like, well, that is such a narrow thing. You are focusing on a sliver of what this movement's really about. I was like, I don't really know if that's true. I mean, when you look at the level, you have so many people that have no other choice. There's only several major gaming websites, and you guys have a shitty policy about actually engaging your audience. One of the things that you learn in SPJ, and we have boring sessions on it when we go to conventions, right? I mean, it's like how to engage your audience, how to get them to talk back to you. Because the one thing we've learned over the years is the people who hate the media the most are the ones who never talk to a reporter, right? If you actually have conversations, if you have exchanges with them on Twitter or X, whatever the hell they're calling it these days, if you have in the comments section, there's a back and forth discussion, you're less likely to assume they're all jerks. But Kotaku and Polygon and there was no engagement of their readers. It's almost like the gaming press reminded me of prostitutes and Johns, because I've interviewed prostitutes before. I've known a couple. There's this weird thing about prostitutes and Johns in that both of them think the other one is totally pathetic, right? A prostitute thinks that guy that's paying me for sex, what a loser. And the guy that's buying the sex from the prostitute thinks like, what a whore. So they have this huge disrespect gap that I have never seen in any other professional arrangement except for gaming journalist and gaming reader or viewer, right? I mean, like the gaming journalists, when I would talk to gaming journalists, they were like, my audience is a bunch of fucking assholes. And when I would talk to GamerGate people, they were like, those journalists are fucking assholes. And I would ask both of them, well, how many of the other have you talked to? Oh, none. Well, that's a problem. So we started after SPJ Airplay, we actually ran for several years the first ever gaming journalism awards. And that to me was more fun than Airplay and mattered more because SPJ didn't want to do it. And I had to vote but we did it, and we stopped doing it because after 5 years, we finally got two things to happen. One, SPJ now has video games as a category in their normal contest. because we don't have to do the bastardized contest anymore. You can apply and win an award, both college and pro, for gaming coverage. And the second thing that happened is the Washington Post actually hired a gaming journalist, and other mainstream publications started to do that. And that made things a little better, because then they had to hew to the same standards as when you cover the city commission or a football team. So, maybe one reason that some of this has died down, not only that, shit gets boring after a while, but I wonder if things also got better a little bit. But you'll tell me. I mean, I don't know. What happens now? I mean, the media, the outrage at the coverage, the unethical shit that happened, is it your perception that the coverage of games is there any better, or is it more diverse? What's your opinion?
I think it kind of mostly died because video and streaming became so popular in the past 10 years that, especially like in the past 5 years, that like if people want to find out about a video game, they can just watch a YouTube video and see the actual gameplay themselves and see the story and like make a decision about if they want to buy it based on that. But I think that there still is like a use for games journalism, and I think that good text-based journalism could be really interesting to read. But I don't know if it's gotten much better or not. I know that some companies have updated their ethics policies, and some companies did actually issue like retractions to articles that we found that were corrupt or contained things that they shouldn't, like unethical ethical violations, things like that. So I think it got a little bit better, but I think also it became a lot less relevant because of video.
I think that's actually true. One thing I found really interesting is when we started the Kunkel Awards, named after the first video game journalist. We actually got his permission from his estate to use his name. Is that over the 4 or 5 years we did this contest, that a lot of the winners were people we never heard of. Like, people, they weren't journalists by trade. They were committing an act of journalism. They were doing a stream, and it just happened to be really good, and it was still journalistic. And then even the ones that were bad, because they were just opinions without facts. But it occurred to us that what was happening was, out of GamerGate, one of the positives, I think, was that you had a number of people like you saying, well, fuck it, I can do my own stream. If Nidar Sarkeesian can do it, I can do it. So then what you had is just more opinions out there. It didn't matter. It doesn't matter to me whether they're good or bad or egregious or stupid. But when you have enough opinions out there, I think it just calms people down, because they feel like there's a place they can be heard. I know there's this argument that, one of the arguments for the good old days when there was only several newspapers and a few TV stations is, we were all bonded together. Now you can exist in your own little bubble. Well, you could always exist in your own little bubble. It's easier today, but hopefully those bubbles, there's so many bubbles that they kind of smash together every so often and pop and join forces, that if there are GamerGate people from back in the day that felt shut out, that they just kept reading and watching all these opinions that pissed them off, even if I agree with all the opinions of the people they hate, and I disagree with all of their opinions, which is a significant portion of the people I dealt with. I agreed with them on nothing, and I agreed with the people they hated more. However, I also agreed that they deserve to have a voice. Now the barrier to entry is so low that you can have that voice. And now you, talking here today, you are subject to the marketplace. If someone is offended by anything you say or we say, they might try to, to retaliate against you legally without harassment, and that'd be totally fine. But there's so many opinions. I have to imagine that you would be incredibly frustrated, because at Airplay you were incredibly frustrated. That if you had no voice at all, if you couldn't do what we're doing right now, and you just had to hear day after day opinions online that you didn't agree with, and you had no voice, that GamerGate might still be around. It might still be as powerful as it was. So I actually think, there's some goodness that came out of this, in that people just got off their ass and started making their own media. And to me, that's great because I don't think journalism is a profession as much as it's a pursuit. And anyone can do it. It's not rocket surgery. Anyone can be a journalist. Um, it's not, it's not easy to be ethical, but it's also not complicated.
Why do you think the anti-GamerGate people didn't talk to you?
Oof. Well, I have some theories. One, it was interesting when I looked up the anti-GamerGate crowd, how many of them sort of predicted the elitism that later became a cultural point, which is, and like I have elitist roots, right? I mean, I'm the only college dropout in my family. Everyone in my family has 2 degrees. Um, you know, they're well off. They're successful. They're, you know, I mean, shit. If you Google Koretzky, I think the first thing that comes up is my cousin Gary, who's a cancer researcher and like just retired as a dean at Duke. I mean, like these are. I understand. I understand that. I don't say elite like they're evil people. I just think you're a fish only swimming in your own water. And most of the anti-GamerGate crowd were very East Coast people. And I say that not to make them an other, like I am them. I totally get what that is. And that they just have a different view of the world. And it's not a disagreeable view, but what it is, it's a kind of pompous view. So to them, I forget what was the guy's name who's freaking on Jeopardy or whatever. We had a brief
Oh, Arthur
conversation before
Chu.
we
It
blocked him.
ends tonight.
Oh,
I remember he did
Jesus.
he's. Some people say he called in the bomb threat, but I don't believe that. He's the one who tweeted
Yeah.
out, "It ends tonight," right like hours before the bomb threat came in. It was like that morning. He tweeted it out.
Wow, that's pretty good timing. We had a brief conversation where he's like, "No, you're wrong. This is wrong," and I was like, so I was trying to ask him, well, tell me how you know that? What research? Point me in the right direction. I'm agnostic on this. I'll go where this takes me. So just tell me. And he said, I don't need to do any research. I know it's wrong. And I'm thinking, like, this is the same kind of crowd that gets mad correctly at fundamentalists, anybody, Christians, Jews, Muslims, like gets mad at anyone who's fundamentally religious and is unquestioning about their beliefs. But they can exhibit that same thing on a situational basis. So when that crowd decides that Gamergate is wrong, they will all follow. That's what that block list was. I mean, what the weirdest thing is to have a block list at all. If you're that smart and well educated, why would you block people that's on a list and you haven't even like why should I do this? Like you're not even asking any questions. You are no different than a Southern Baptist going to church and listening to the pastor say, you got to vote for this guy because the other guy is evil and it's going to hell. Oh, I guess I better do that. Like you are no different. So I understand, right? They're in their own social circle. They care about the opinions of others in their social circle. You are not in their social circle. So at some level, it's easy just to go along. So I don't even know what this fucking thing is. I'm not a gamer. Some of them are obviously misogynistic asshole harassers. It's true. Some of them are. But I'll go along with someone saying all of them are. Why not? Because it doesn't affect my days at the country club or going to Soho or doing anything. So yeah. So I just think it was just easy to do. And there was no downside to them because the people that were pro Gamergate didn't swim in the same water they did.
Do you think there was anything that the GamerGate people could have done, the pro GamerGate people, to dispel this narrative that we were misogynistic or harassers?
We had a lot of discussions about that because, like you said earlier, I kept hearing, well, we're a leaderless movement. And I kept saying, so elect some leaders or at least some spokespeople. And they're like, well, that goes against what we believe. I said, that's fine. I'm not criticizing how you want to run. I'm going to criticize your anger, because you can't be a leaderless movement and then get mad when people come to conclusions about it that you may not like. Because like, well, we're not doing the harassing. Those are third-party trolls or a small percentage of the people that claim to be in our group. And I would even agree with them. I said, look, I've met enough of you to know I've definitely met some assholes, and they deserve to be condemned, arrested, or whatever. But I also met a lot of people that were legitimately concerned about stuff. So I agree with you. However, if this is a system you want in place, take responsibility for it. Because you can't then blame people for not spending 6 hours on a stream like I did to figure this shit out, because they got other priorities in their life. If you want to get people's attention, just like you pay attention to certain things, usually there's a person, right? When you watch a movie or read a book or watch a TV show, the plot unfurls by people. Journalists are supposed to write about people. There's no person here that's even a spokesperson for your. They don't have to be the leader. They don't have to give you marching orders. But that's what I was trying to get at with the panel, to pick the panel. Who are the people that you feel say, 70, 80% of the things they say, you're like, that's what we're about. You may disagree with 20 or 30% of it, right? But 2/3 of it, yeah, that's my guy. That's my woman. That's who I can nod my head when they're talking and go, fuck yeah. And I could never get that definitive list. And if you don't have that definitive list, that means that you can't all agree even 2/3 of the time. And then you're mad at everyone else for not agreeing with you or understanding you ever. That's just weird to me.
The leaderless structure obviously has certain downsides, but it does seem like the media covered Black Lives Matter and was like way more positive, even though that's also a leaderless movement, or even Occupy Wall Street.
Well, I was just going to say, Occupy Wall Street is a better example, because I was actually at Occupy Wall Street in New York, because we were doing that journalism conference that Totila was speaking at, and I sent students down there, and it was such a shit show, because like they couldn't do anything without having, like, they couldn't make the smallest decisions without everyone participating. And then they had this weird thing where, like, I'm a white man, so I should speak the least, and like, I'm a black woman, so I should speak the most. And I'm like, no, I'm all for equality, but like, you're now spent an hour arguing about how you're going to debate. And that trust me, they were as pissed to this day, because I'm a boring business reporter now. Back when that was going on, we actually covered Occupy from all the business things they want to do, like how their economic policies were just not going to work. Like them, liberal or conservative, I don't care, because I could agree with some of the things they want, right? But it ain't going to work. And they were furious. I heard the same things about Occupy after Airplay that I heard doing Airplay. Same thing. Like, you don't get us. You don't understand us. The media isn't covering us right. They're making fun of us. They're saying we're all communists. Well, dude, that's your fault. Because what am I supposed to do about that? And they actually told us, well, you should live here with us. Like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I like to shower, and and like, it's not my fucking job. I mean, I'll write about you. But there are better journalists to do it. I got involved in GamerGate because I'm pretty self-actualized. I'm a D-list journalist. I mean, I freelance for the New York Times, but they would never hire me. I'm a college dropout. However, I wanted to get involved in GamerGate because it was obvious that no other traditional trained journalist was going to do it. Occupy, a whole bunch of journalists covered it, and by and large did a good job pointing out how fucked up it was. Black Lives Matter is different because that is an organization.
Well, the organization is corrupt, though. It's a separate thing.
Oh no, that definitely. I don't argue with that. There's been good journalism by journalists who agree with Black Lives Matter's politics, but they will still write about the management of the money and everything else. But they are an organization, right? They were founded by someone. They were chartered. They have a company. They have a website that has a person on it. You can contact a spokesman. So it is not a leaderless movement at all. So whether you can't compare it to GamerGate because no one started a site called GamerGate.com to marshal all the opinions. And then journalists could go to that person. And then if you didn't like what they said, you could argue with that. Because there are people, even within the Black Lives Matter movement, that are either more progressive or more conservative within that movement, and they argue about it. But they have a focal point around which to argue. There's like a center of gravity that they can rotate around. And Gamergate was deep space with just things, asteroid belt, just shit bouncing off of everything.
I I I was like semi involved with BLM, in the sense that I like was tacitly like supporting of them after the George Floyd thing. Um, but I don't I think that like a lot of the people who supported that would say that the organization was a separate entity from the hashtag movement, and that organization doesn't represent us, or it only represents some of us. I don't think it was like
That,
they all
and
uniformly
that's probably true.
accepted.
No, look, that's probably true. But the thing is that as a journalist, I could call somebody, talk to them, and then I would have their opinion. And then if I found someone on social media saying, I disagree with Black Lives Matter on this point, then I could talk to them. And I may not get the story 100% representative, but if I get 70, 80%, that's still better than nothing. And it's still educational for the people that read it. Gamergate, I couldn't do that. I was trying to figure out how many different opinions are there. So who can I talk to that would give me, say there's 3 or 4 sides of this story, right? So, there, because within the BLM movement, there are people that are like defund the police, and other people are like, that's fucking stupid. Like, reform the police, but why would you do that? That's ridiculous. So there's an argument within the movement, but it's a defined argument. I just explained it to you. No one could explain to Sharon Dutton what Gamergate was. And Milo proved that point for talking for 10 minutes about something that wasn't Gamergate, and everyone was telling me to shut up so he could keep talking about not Gamergate. That was not a good sign.
I do think you're being a little bit too harsh though. Maybe it's because I was involved, but like it seemed like I was involved in like every capacity almost at GG. Or like I was literally in like tons of private DM groups and stuff. Like I knew like all the shit that was going on. Most of it behind the scenes stuff, a lot of it active stuff that was happening. I was, on most of the forums. Like we
No,
had message
your
boards,
bona
right?
fides,
We have
your bona
message
fides are
boards.
unimpeachable. I mean, that's true. I don't, I'll stipulate right now that you definitely know what's going on. So tell me where I'm wrong, because I'm not married to any of my opinions here. This is my experience. But
So it seemed like there
just
were like
like back then, I just want to know what you think.
there were I mean I think that there were like 4 major gamergate communities, and you could like throw in like there were like over 2 dozen probably altogether, um but there were like 4 major ones, and like you could go to each of those as a journalist, ask
What
people, hey,
were
what do
so
you think?
tell me those communities. What were the 4? The 4 big
Kota-
ones out of the 12.
Kotaku in action on Reddit,
Yeah, I remember
gamergate
that.
HQ on 8chan, V on 8chan. They had a permanent gamergate thread on 8chan. Every day was a new thread. And then Twitter, which obviously Twitter is, kind of a mall, but like you could go to any of like the forums, like the 3 forums, and like ask people, hey, what are you guys about? And like you'll probably get a bunch of answers. And like there's gonna be disagreement, but you'll probably get like a general like ish consensus from like 80 or 90% of the people, I'd say. It's about
That's funny
ethics,
because
it's about censorship, it's about,
I guess I was on KI. I later set up some journalists to actually interview the mods, but Twitter was a shit show because I remember going to work one morning and then at my lunch hour checking my phone, and I remember the number 2,912. That's how many notifications I had over one thing that I had posted, and it was weird. I would post something on my personal blog, which is not SEO, to just whatever, and I would have. I mean, literally, you can still go there. There's like hundreds of comments. And then I would go to KIA and read hundreds of more comments. And I always remember the HAN post was my favorite one. It was a shitty Photoshop job, but it was the word went with the image was someone said Koretzky sucks donkey dicks or so Koretzky sucks camel dicks because it started with donkey dicks. So no, he sucks camel dicks because those are nastier. I don't know how they knew that. And then there was a Photoshop image underneath that of me actually doing it with the words, "Why insult camels?" And I was like, okay, that's kind of funny. I'm not offended by that. Can we get back to talking about the issue? And then on 8chan, they called KIA a bunch of pussies. So I'm like, why? So I never got an explanation. It just went back to dicks. So I don't know. I mean, maybe you're right, but at least in my experience, the 8chan people, for some reason, thought the KIA people were like not committed enough. I don't know what it was.
Well,
I never got an answer. It
which
just always went
8chan
back to
community
pussy.
though? Because there was a rogue group of GamerGate people. You may have heard the term GG Revolt.
Yeah, I remember that.
Were they the ones who were saying that we were pussies?
I don't, I'm amazed at how much I don't remember anymore. When I remembered every detail of it at the time, I don't remember. I just
Yeah.
remember that, like, I remember thinking someone would tell me, like, oh, okay, well, let's go there. This will be easy. And then I'll go over to 4chan. Then I'll go to 8chan. Then I'll listen to this stream. Then I'll listen to that stream. Then I have to go to this site. Then there's this manifesto, this alternate Wikipedia thing that I have to read. And then I was like, fuck, this isn't really helping. Like, it was, what I wanted to do is it's kind of ironic being a college dropout, but I wanted to take all of them, put them in a classroom and teach them how to write. Because maybe that's the issue. Maybe if I could help them distill their thoughts into essay-like form that, start with a conclusion, start with your thesis, then explain it. Instead of like everything I remember I think it was Oliver Campbell. He's like, Airplay is only going to be 4 hours. It's got to be at least 8. I'm like, dude, like like no one's going to do that. So like the big argument when we started organizing Airplay was that, well, this wasn't a universal argument, but I don't remember who made it, but I am censoring GamerGate because I am by limiting the time, I am lying about being agnostic about this. I'm like, yeah, but that works both ways. If anything, GamerGate actually does show up, they get limited too. So any limit that equally affects both sides is not censorship, and that's why I'm kind of bummed they didn't show up, because in a way it would have been better for discussing GamerGate. I think actually the way it turned out was actually better for the journalism, which I don't know how many people there cared about, but the unsung hero of that whole Airplay thing was Lynn Walsh, because she did not have to do that. She was president-elect. She's president of this 100-year-old organization that is pretty freaking staid. I mean, I like it, but it's not like a real cutting-edge organization. It's really old, and it has its own traditions and everything. And they banned me. The board of directors that I was on took a vote and banned me from using the SPJ logo. So if you actually look at the SPJ Airplay screen, I had to create my own little logo for SPJ because they wouldn't let me use it. They have a legal right to do that. They didn't try to ban me from doing it because a bunch of journalists banning another journalist from actually talking about journalism would be a really bad look. But Lynn Walsh did not have to do that. And for her to actually, and she did her homework. So by the time she was on stage, she had read the stories. The GamerGate, because I had said to GamerGate, present me your best case. 3 stories that show that the gaming press fucked up. And Lynn Walsh and Ren LaForme read everything and agreed in a couple of those cases. The third case was too hard to explain, and it was too he said, she said. But in 2 cases, that yes, you were right. The gaming press objectively violated industry standards and the SPJ Code of Ethics, which is the code of ethics for journalists. And you're right about those 2. And of course, where there's 2, it'd be really weird if those were the only 2. So she's the one who really deserves most of the credit. And then, I don't know if you remember, I was a year later, 2 years later, South by Southwest was going to do something. and then it got to be controversial, and then they
Save
shut it down.
point.
But she was,
It still
yeah,
happened, I think, right? It just they moved it to a different building. That's all.
yeah. So Lynn participated in that, even though she got shit from her own class, right? Because Lynn was at the time investigative producer for an NBC station in San Diego. So she wasn't like, plying her trade in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, right? I mean, she was in California doing her thing. She didn't have to do any of this. She could have just said, "No, I'm not coming," and she did. And Ren LaForme, same thing. Point Institute is a very respectable place and doesn't want that kind of controversy. And he still said, "No, I'm going to go to this," because he is a gamer and he understood there were legitimate issues here, was equally down on the harassment, and wanted to be clear that his involvement was in no way condoning any of that. But those are the two that really had something to lose. I had nothing to lose because, and I assume it's the anti-Gamergate crowd, but they tried to contact my boss. They sent an email saying that, I am involved in misogyny and harassment. And, I've been working at the company long enough. They know that that's not the case. And plus, that might work in higher education more than it works in the private sector or in government. But like, they were like, no, we get it. We're fine. So, I guess that was the stab at harassment there. During Airplay, someone posted my, phone number and address and whatever. But that was the extent that I got. I do wonder, and people have wondered for me, what if I was a woman, would it be different? I don't know. That's a really good question. I assume it would be worse, but who would it be worse from? Which segment of Gamergate? Because I would say probably about a quarter of all the people I dealt with were women. So not a 50-50 split, but still, that's a significant amount of women that were involved in this movement, that were definitely anti-harassment. So I don't know where that. See, but like everything else, Gamergate, I'm going to shut up now, having resolved nothing in that statement.
Well, there's actually a study that's been done. I don't know about the methodology so much, but um, I actually linked it in my Discord. I tagged you, but it shows that self-reportedly, women who supported Gamergate claim that they've been harassed at higher rates than men who supported Gamergate. But like that's self-reported. I don't know how seriously you want to take that. What is harassment? Someone sent me a mean tweet once. That harassment. Someone got doxxed. It's obviously like a whole other level. People like you got swatted. Like that's a whole. Well, actually, I don't think anybody ever got swatted on either side. But like there's like obviously different tiers of like what people consider harassment. And some people might say that like, oh, a mean comment on Reddit is that harassment? I don't know.
Yeah, but come on, man. I mean, if someone tells me they're going to rape me, that means
Oh,
little to
obviously,
me
obviously, there's
and a lot
lines, right?
more to a woman. So
Yeah,
no,
there's.
I think the harassment of women, that I had a lot of arguments about that. Like, that's not true. Yeah, it is. Just deal with it. And that's not Gamergate. That's life, right? So what I do find interesting, I've a thought experiment that I said at the time is, I really wish Anita Sarkeesian was a guy saying the same stuff in those videos, because I wonder like what that would have been like. That would just been interesting to me, like to gauge the different response.
Okay, so I've got another anti-Gamergate question, and we've got an anti-Gamergater in the chat on Kick who wants me to ask a question too, which I think it's a decent question. So I'll shoot the first question that the anti-gamer. This is from anti-Gamergate, not my wording, just to be clear. For many who were opposed to Gamergate, the movement was seen as a more respectable public face for the smaller quote unquote Quinspiracy movement that it had stemmed from, whose goal was to ruin the professional reputations of certain women by pushing their sexual history to the forefront of public discussion. What would you have to say? What would you have to say, or sorry, what would you say to people who feel like Airplay and similar events only serve to further this goal and did little, if anything, to advance discussion about games media? That's an anti-Gamergate question.
No, it's a fair question too, and it's one that I struggled with because I got I got a lot of shit at one point. I should look it up maybe, but I remember there was a post I wrote where it's like, Zoe Quinn was harassed. It was wrong. You have to admit that is wrong. And
Yeah, 1,000%.
and then Brianna Wu, the same thing. I remember getting photos showing her house that she couldn't have been at her house at the day she said she was harassed. Like, you have spent a lot of time, like looking on Google Earth and going through it to prove, like, why are you spending so much time to prove that she wasn't harassed? And I talked to her, and I believe that she was, because at some point you have a good bullshit meter as a journalist, and unless you're a sociopath, when you talk to someone long enough and enough times, and the story's consistent. So I believe all of that. And there was definitely a contingent, the whole conspiracy thing. They really were pissed off at her, and it was to an unhealthy level that had nothing to do with anything. And those are the people that I just stopped communicating with, not blocking them, but just every time I would talk, like, look, you're not adding anything new to this conversation. You obviously have an unhealthy obsession here. I don't understand it. The only part of where her sex life intersects with the journalism was, was she dating a games journalist at the time that games journalist was writing about her or her friends, and did
promoting
not
her game.
disclose that fact,
Yeah.
promoting her game. So that is the only point that where it intersects with a larger issue. Otherwise, I don't care who she sleeps with or what she does. Publishing naked photos of her, or I guess the defense was, well, she published them. I didn't take them, but you shared them for what reason? Like, why? What were you hoping to accomplish with that? Well, everyone should know that she's a liar.
Well, I don't think anybody would say that, because I don't think anybody, like, in our community
I was told that.
I don't think anybody in our community would, like, support, like, that sort of stuff.
I had people defending all of that, or at least trying to mitigate it.
I mean, maybe it was
not a
GG
lot.
Revolt, I don't know, but, like, it certainly wasn't the mainstream GG.
Well, see, that's that, and they got back to that. Like, how do I know? So I would just talk to enough people, and especially the women were mega uncomfortable with that demographic of GamerGate, that were so focused on Quinn. I had this argument with a couple of anti-GamerGate people before they wouldn't talk to me. And it kind of harkens back to this question, which was, why are you, even if you're not talking about that, because it wasn't part of Airplay, I don't really care about, except for the dating of the journalist part. This thing had an evil beginning, the evil seed from which it grew. Therefore, you shouldn't touch it. And I would respond that there's a lot of journalism that's done, or good things that happen out of evil motives at their start. I'm not going to ignore a story because it has, this thing might have got its start from that jilted ex-boyfriend who couldn't fucking write. Instead of ignoring the story because of that, I think we should confront the story because of that. We should call out the bullshit in that. And I tried to do that. If I have any regret, I don't know that I might have called it out enough. But if I didn't, it was because there's just so much thrown at you all the time, and I only had so many hours in the day that I was writing about so many other things, that the only thing I look back upon and I wonder is, did I say it often enough on enough streams, and did I write it enough to say Brianna Wu and Zoe Quinn don't matter in this context? I had Brianna Wu help me with the Kunkel Awards, and her participation was great. She knows the gaming industry. She had a lot of good things to say. There was none of it was, ideological. It was just like, help me set up these video games. I need to, James Fudge, her, and some other people. It was great. But yeah, I would agree with the guy or the individual asking the question that none of that stuff mattered. I feel bad for any of those women that went through that. They didn't deserve it. The punishment doesn't fit the crime. Even if she did the worst things that some people told me she did, like, she's a vixen who manipulated reporters by dating them. Well, I don't blame her. I blame the journalist. It's like blaming the mistress instead of your spouse. Like if my problem is with the journalist who dated her and didn't disclose. If anything, he did her a massive disservice by not disclosing and covering that up. He actually did harm to his girlfriend. And, he didn't cause it because everyone else has agency. They did the harassing, but he certainly didn't help. And that's why there are journalism ethics, because there are unintended consequences from being unethical. It doesn't just hurt you as the reporter.
Hey, can I step away for like 2 seconds? My neighbor knocked on the door.
Well, hey, I guess I own the mic now. This is weird. I have no idea what to say. As a journalist, I have no idea what to say unless I'm having a conversation with someone.
Cool. I told her I'd get with her in like an hour. Or, whatever. Like some amount of time. Sorry about that.
Yeah? I said a lot of mean things about you while you're away.
So look, I agree. I don't care about Zoe Quinn's sex life. I don't give a shit about all of that stuff. Of course. But I'm interviewing somebody coming up. Probably interviewing them. And a woman who supported GamerGate, she has this view, and I think it's one that like a lot of people share. That these people lied about us for fucking years. Like, we should be able to defend ourselves against these accusations that these people fucking lied about us and built their entire careers. And Brianna Wu was making $13,000 a month in donations for a while. $13,000 a month. And she was literally posting, we have archives of this, posting posts on her own her own community, her own forum, harassing herself under her main account. Like, this is like proven fact. Now you could say, if you would be super charitable, let's be charitable, that she posted the harassment against herself, which she claims, I think now, that she's been confronted about it by interviewers, is that she did it so that she could cultivate all the harassment in one topic. That was what she claimed, and then she deleted the topic later because she realized it was a bad idea. But like, look, it's fucking weird, man. These people lied about us for fucking years. Like, obviously, some people did harass, Zoe Quinn or Brianna Wu or Nia Sarkeesian or whoever. But like, the vast majority of the people involved in that weren't GamerGate people. We have studies that prove this. We have our own actions to condemn harassment. Like, I wouldn't tolerate anything like that in my space. I moderated multiple GamerGate communities. We would never tolerate that stuff. People trying to plan harassment. Like, and then when someone was harassed, like Allison Rapp, or when Brianna Wu was harassed, like, I think we responded in an ethical way. But rather than say like, okay, look, some people are bad, and like that's bad, and we shouldn't like support that, of course. But like, they should have said, look, what they went to the press and they're like, oh, all the GamerGaters are evil, misogynist, haters, fucking Nazi, whatever. They're evil fucking people, and we got to destroy them. That's what they went to the press and said. And it wasn't fucking true. It wasn't fucking true for 99.44%. If you want to look at the Women Action Media study, it was fucking bullshit. They fucking lied about us. That's how some people feel.
I get it. And, if there was a really strong gaming press, they would have tackled that Brianna Wu story. And even if she posted some harassment of her own for a reason, that is still a great story. That's just a great story regardless. That should have been that's the kind of story that the gaming press could do that a stream really can. I mean, there's so many fascinating gaming streams since we did the Kinkle Awards that we watched, and they could do a lot of things well, game reviews and opinion and stuff. Really, what Kotaku and Polygon should have been doing was doing that investigative kind of stuff, because like Kotaku did some great, I remember they sent people to Japan to cover like some of the games being developed. It was just they did some great stories, just good stories about video games. Even if you don't like video games, they're just really good. A story about some of what you're talking about done journalistically, not ideologically, would have been great. But the mainstream media is too busy to do that. The gaming press, that's their territory. That's what they should be doing. the question is, did they not do it because they're just not mature enough as an industry, not the individuals, but just like the gaming press isn't well developed? Or were they, and this is some evidence of this that me and Ren and Lynn found, is it that they're not mature enough to do journalism against the people they agree with? A real journalist, a kind of a seminal moment for a journalist is when you write something negative about someone you like or something you believe. Like if that someone whose belief you agree with fucked up, maybe unintentionally, maybe not evilly, but they've made a mistake, and you have to cover it. And it gives the opportunity for the other side to say, see, they're wrong about this, they're wrong about everything. If you don't do it, you're actually not helping your own cause, because eventually it's going to come out and people are going to be more suspicious. So I don't know. And when all this stuff came up, when someone would tell me, Brianna Wu harassed herself, I said, look, you know what? I don't know. I'm not denying it. I'm not accepting it. I don't have time to look into this because I got another 6-hour stream I got to do with Oliver Campbell. But that is a story that someone should look into. And that's what a gaming journalist should be able to spend 3 or 4 days on and write a story, quoting people and doing the journalism. The problem with the studies that you're citing is I didn't have the time, and no one else wanted to do it, to go back and study your methodology to make sure that it was working. All journalists will rely on studies compiled by interest groups. I mean, most surveys are commissioned by someone with a cause. What you hope for is that when you drill down the methodology that, you know, you can still report on it faithfully, and then you bounce it off of some other people that may be on the other side, and through that synthesis and antithesis, you come up with a story that is mostly true. That's what was lacking in the gaming press. That's why this was so difficult for me. That normally in a dispute like this, I would be able to go to a Kotaku, read something, and if I couldn't read it, I would at least be able to call them. And I do respect Stephen Totilo. He's a good journalist, but I disagreed immensely when he defended his journal, or he tried to kind of, it wasn't that big a deal that they dated. It just, come on. It didn't, it's called an appearance of a conflict of interest. It's like, it wasn't a conflict. I made sure of it. People care about the appearance of a conflict of interest. That's what journalists really have to guard against. That's why we get so hoity-toity and arrogant about our lives, because we realize it's the appearance. And the appearance in the gaming press at that time really sucked.
Yeah. And I guess, as I'm doing an active journalism with this book, I should be like very qualified with my statement. You could read that post that she made as harassing herself. You could alternatively read it as I wanted people to harass me here because, according to her, according to Stardust, who supposedly interviewed, who did interview her, Stardust, another streamer, says that when she interviewed her, she claims that the reason that she made this post was to encourage people to keep the harassment in one area. That's why she did it. That's what her official statement is on this, as far as I'm aware. Um,
But if
but
that
you could
statement was made after,
years
only
later,
after being caught, then that's, I mean,
years later.
there's a lot you could drill down on that, and it's sad that it wasn't. I'm not taking a side in that, but I wish that someone would have done the journalism so I could read up on it. And alas, it never happened.
Yeah. So obviously, I was going to ask you if you think trust in media is important, but like obviously you do, or you wouldn't be doing all this. So how
Well,
do
I do it for
we?
the money and the women.
I see. But how do we go from where do we go from here? How do we improve? Because like obviously the media is fucking important. It's an important aspect of our society that should be like holding people accountable and investigating things, and like it has like an important role within a liberal democratic society. Like it's fucking important, but like people don't trust it, and they don't trust it for good reasons in many cases. Like so how the fuck do we fix this?
Look, I'm old, so I'm in my 50s. When I started in journalism, um, I remember this. It was like in the 90s. More than half the newspapers became chain owned at that point. It used to be a lot of smaller ownerships. And then now most of the newspapers are chain owned. And what's happening, those are blowing up and people are starting their own nonprofit websites, whatever. You're doing journal, other people are doing journalism. It used to be, you couldn't just start a newspaper. It was like starting a car company. Like you needed printing press and it was just the barrier to entry was awful. I think what's going to happen is that the mainstream media is it's already kind of dissembling and breaking down and you have these people just committing acts of journalism, and that was journalism at its roots back in the penny press days. There was just so much journalism going on. I think the bad thing about that is when I worked at really small newspapers coming up, that the publisher was some rich white guy that wouldn't let you write about what was going on if it was his friend in this small community. So that was bad. However, journalism at its start was a bunch of malcontents that weren't part of the power structure. They had nothing to lose by reporting that. So what you have now is, in part of SPJ, and I'm in Florida, and there's this woman that works in a town called Winter Haven, Winter Gardens. There's two of them. Winter Gardens, I think, is where she is. And the city commission there tried to ban her from the meetings. And it was this whole thing, and we defended her. She started that publication. She is not part of the power structure in that community. She covers it. She just cares about it. She's not making a shit ton of money. She wants to make a living, not a killing. More people that do that in whatever niche it is, whether it's gaming or whether it's their community, that was the essence of journalism. And it's harder. You can hate that. You can hate that media outlet. But if you see that woman every day, you aren't going to assume that she's you're not going to have a conspiracy theory about her because you see her all the time. You see her in Publix doing her grocery shopping. And I hate that bitch. But you know that bitch. That's the problem. With the gaming press, like I said, it was such this weird disconnect. They covered gaming and they talked to zero gamers. They talked to developers. They went to conferences and hung out with developers on rooftops and drank with them and didn't talk to their audience at all. That is the problem with the New York Times. I've written columns about the New York Times trying to interview me about topics and how clunky that is when they're trying to call me from New York. I've always said the New York Times does a great job covering New York and a shitty job covering anything outside of that, right? So I hope what happens is that spreads more, right? The more that happens, the better off journalism is. I was, for a few years, managing editor of the world's largest jazz magazine. You've never heard of it. No one listens to jazz. But what's so funny about jazz is you can go to college and get a degree in jazz. Berklee College of Music, down here, University of Miami can do that. You can graduate with a degree in jazz. It is now a highbrow art form. It started in the whorehouses of New Orleans as a way of playing music that would keep you fucking by black artists that wouldn't be allowed anywhere else. And it went from that to highbrow stuff. Journalism's done the same thing. Journalism was done by malcontents and social rejects who were covering their community looking for bad things, so they like to take down assholes. And now you can go to journalism school at Columbia in New York and pay $50,000 to be a journalist making $50,000. That is a bigger problem. What needs to happen is more people like you doing your own thing, and over time, I hope people like you would learn, hey, you know what? It's in my greedy self-interest to do things more journalistic because I can preach to the converted. I can do a stream, be opinionated, and have people that agree with my opinion, and I'm going to get topped out at this many subscribers. Or I can do it journalistically, a little more airtight, present both sides of the story, and then more people are going to look at it because now it's just interesting and a little less he said, she said. There's just some data in here. I went to the other side. The difference between, I remember at Airplay, during the bomb threat, just hanging outside talking to people. And someone asked me, what's the difference between Breitbart and the New York Times? Are both journalism. I said, that is bullshit. I said, here's how you know. Go to New York Times, and they actually said the New York Times sucks because they've been wrong about stories and they've actually run corrections. I said, but that's why. That's why the New York Times is a legit source. Go to Breitbart, find the last time they ever issued a correction. When was the last time Breitbart was wrong? Good journalists, if you want to know what a good journalist is, just count up their mistakes. That doesn't mean they're a bad journalist. That means they're a good journalist because they're willing to admit their mistakes. No one's perfect, but God damn it, I don't know how many times I can listen to MSNBC and Fox News and never hear them say they were wrong about anything. If you want your book and you want to do right by GamerGate, you will do your damnedest to interview people that disagree with everything you say, give them a fair shot, then let the conversation continue. Let your listeners, your readers argue back and forth. I see arguments going on in the chat, and through that synthesis over time, you'll have a bigger community because people will realize there's more going on here. This is the one place I can go to get both sides. It was so weird during GamerGate having to go to KIA, and I forget the other one. What was the anti-GamerGate? GamerGazi. I remember it said some weird name. Yeah, so like I had to toggle between both of those things. And sometimes like it was like shuttling a conversation between people. Like, well, KI says this, and then they would, and I'd go back to KI. Well, GamerGazi said this, and then I have to go back to the like, Jesus Christ, how come you guys just can't get together and have this conversation? So if you can actually synthesize that conversation, you'll be a fucking rock star.
Yeah, I do have 3 anti-Gamergate people who've agreed to be interviewed. 2 of them are doing text-only interviews, most likely. The third one's doing voice, which, I mean, I feel like the voice ones, it's actually a normal conversation. I feel like that's better for the book. And you're able to ask like follow-ups and like guide it rather than be like, oh, I'm responding to a list of questions, which I think is kind of sucky.
Tell the people, the ones that are doing the text conversation, 2 things. One, tell them, fine, but I'm going to put in my coverage that you would only respond this way. And 2, tell them they're cowards because they're not talking to you because they're afraid that they need time to defend their position, and they're afraid of saying something stupid. Like I'm sure I said 5 stupid things in this conversation.
I did too.
But if you can't defend yourself in real time, you have to wonder, are you really confident about your position? If a question is going to flummox you so badly that you have to go research it and formulate an answer, how strong is your argument? And what is wrong with being asked a question and saying, you know what, it's a really good question, I don't know. Like, be human. That's the one that is the one thing that really just got tiresome about Gamergate and anti-Gamergate, is there was only a handful of people, and the most interesting people were the ones that were like, that would actually say this statement. I never thought about that. You know how rare that was? Like, no matter what I said, everyone's like, no, it's because of this. It's like, have you ever been wrong? And then what's so funny is if I admitted I was wrong, they're like, yeah. Like, well, what'd you win? Because I'm in this to learn, and I have no horse in this race. I'm not dating any of you. You don't pay any of my salary. Not sleeping with you, and I don't get my drugs from you. So I have no problem listening to you and arguing with you and then saying, hey, you might be right about that. So to me, as a journalist, when I get into stories like this, well, this wasn't really a story, but when I get into situations like this, I most respect the people that admit they were wrong. And I always ask some sort of question that gets to that. Like, tell me when you were wrong. In all of Gamergate, I think Alum Bakari was the only guy that was circumspect at any particular point. It was like, well, maybe this went wrong and maybe that shouldn't have happened. And like, but and then some of the women about the harassment, but they didn't do that. But it's something that they had done, some act of commission that someone did that they're like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have posted that. I probably shouldn't have done that. I heard that so rarely. And I hear that so rarely in most stories these days. That is, I think if Gamergate predicted anything, they predicted the righteous asshole. Like, that you can You can talk to so many people that they're just convinced of their entire worldview. It's airtight and there's no holes in it. I'm in my 50s and I have more doubts now about my view of the world than I did in my 20s. But in Gamergate, I just met a lot of people that were just convinced that they were right 100% of the time. And I don't trust people like that. I don't trust politicians like that. I hate politicians for a totally different reason. I hate politicians because they're never fucking wrong. I respect any politician that says, like, oh, they flip flopped. Well, if they flip flop because they just wanted to, like, but if they flip flop because, like, oh, you're fucking wrong about that, I will vote for them. I will vote for politicians that make mistakes and own up to them. I will like sources that admit they're wrong. And I want to hang out with people that have made some interesting fuck ups in their life because it is really boring to go drinking with someone who's always right.
Yeah, I actually honesty is like an important thing for me. I've adopted it pretty wholeheartedly. I think in the past year or so, and not that I was like some horrible like serial liar before, but I guess I kind of was. Like we all were. Everybody lies all the time. It seems about like small shit that doesn't matter. Like, oh, why were you late? Oh, well, I got stuck in traffic. And it's like, no, the real reason is like I hit the snooze button, or whatever. Like people lie all the time for stupid reasons, and I don't want to live my life that way. And like I was very honest, like maybe too honest, but I think it was important actually that when I made my post about originally I was going to do an encyclopedia, not this interview book,
I remember that. I remember you doing, yeah, you told me that.
but I didn't end up doing that. Because one, I don't want to spend like 10 years of my life on this shit. I want to spend like 6 months. Uh, but I actually in my post. Oh, hang on, that's the wrong post. What? Does it not exist anymore? There's no shot. Okay, here it is. Writing a GamerGate encyclopedia. I went through. I said I also want to be straightforward about my mistakes with GamerGate. While I'd done many successful things with GamerGate, I also did some things that didn't work out. I created the GamerGate Investigatory Commission, which was a fact-finding commission with people on both sides. Then I go on about why that failed. I was I was honest about how I maybe accidentally harassed this guy once. Actually, um, I was straight up about that. And the people in my community, like, you don't like. It's interesting too because everybody, it's weird. Everybody now thinks of me as like this guy who was like super optics focused on GG and was like uh super great about like condemning bad actors. And like I think I like generally was, but like I actually almost did harass somebody once. Um I two instances actually. I bring them both up in the thing. One was this guy was this like blogger guy or games journalist or whatever. I don't know. It was years ago. He wrote an article about Kuku Ruyo. I'm not sure if you interact with him at all.
Never heard of him.
Okay, he's a big artist. He's like an artist. He did a bunch of GamerGate art, and this guy was accusing him of being a pedophile because he drew like a 17-year-old character, fictional character, who's like 17 in this anime, and drew her in like a semi-sexualized way. And so he wrote this like whole article about how this guy's a pedophile, and I knew the guy, and I'm like, well, what the fuck? This is bullshit. So I made a video, like a hit piece video on the guy, and then I took it down like 2 days later, or maybe like 2 hours later. It was like really fast. I took it down. I emailed the guy and I sent him an apology. But like that was like a moment where like the worst angels of my nature prevailed, um, because he had made some like stupid comment like 8 years ago about like where he, and so I was like putting him on blast for the stupid thing he said like 8 years ago. And this was like 8 years ago that I made the video. So it was like 16 years ago he made this comment. It's like, it's stupid. I don't think people should operate in the world that way. So I took down the video and I apologized. And then a second time, I almost harassed somebody, or maybe I did harass them. I don't know. Do you remember Helicopter Guy?
Yes, I do.
Oh, really? Holy shit! You know Helicopter Guy?
I don't know him. I just remember it came up.
Okay, yeah, he was the best of the anti-gamergaters. So opinions are divided. Some people hate him, some people like him. I like him. I want to talk to him again. I want to interview him. Um, I actually wanted him to do this project with me and interview people with me, but he's kind of dropped off the face of the earth.
Oh
But he
wow.
he was on a live stream with me. I was like super new to GamerGate. Like I just got involved in like 2015. It was spring of 2015. I got involved, um, and we were doing a live stream together. And I leaked the live stream leak to this troll group because I thought it would be funny. I was a stupid kid. I was like 20 years old. Okay, I'm like, oh, these trolls want to come on or whatever. I'm gonna leak it there. It'll be funny to see how this plays out, to see how it goes. I didn't know that they were like actual harasser trolls. I thought they were just like joking around, right? And I got so much shit. I almost got like kicked out of GamerGate, basically, insofar as you can be. Like it, so like I know how seriously like we took harassment because like my reputation in GG was like super tarnished for like 3 months. I almost got banned from forums discussing this stuff, and just because I thought it would be funny to like leak the invite to the Google Hangout. That's which I think was a horrible thing. I should have done it, and I apologized publicly. And Helicopter Guy forgave me publicly too, to his credit. But like people would even like for years later would be like, "Oh, don't talk to Netscape. He's a bad actor." Like that's how seriously people took it. Like my reputation like was not super great, but like I when I did the public apology and Helicopter Guy publicly forgave me and we made up publicly, like when that happened, I think most people were still on my side, but there was probably like 5 to 10% of people involved with the movement who hated my fucking guts and thought I was like a fucking horrible person because of this. And like
I think that's
it's
great.
yeah.
I think nothing makes you more sympathetic to other people than being trashed like that. That's why I hate thin-skinned journalists. But and that's what the GamerGate was a good test for me of my beliefs, which is don't take it personally. Because I mean, plus it was so over the top. It wasn't really a threat, but like people accusing me, are you going to open a Patreon account? I'm like, I don't even know what that is. You're just doing this. You're doing this to be an e-celeb. I'm like, is that like an e-cigarette? What is that? I don't know what that is. So, but it is interesting for watching people ascribe motives to what you're doing that aren't true, but you can understand where they might draw that conclusion. And usually when they draw conclusions about you, it's not because of what you said, it's the lack of stuff you said. It's nature abhors the vacuum, and if you don't fill it with information, you don't stop the flow of information, you start the flow of conspiracy theory. So I wonder how much of Gamergate's misinformation was because there wasn't enough information.
You said that the people doing the text interviews are cowards. They are acting in a cowardly way, let's say. I
Yes.
To defend them a little bit. One of them's in the chat right now, in the kick chat. One of them is in the kick chat.
Is that the one who said I sound like Norm Macdonald? I don't know if that's an
No,
insult or a
that was the
compliment.
YouTube. That was the YouTube chat.
Oh.
There's 3 chats. There's kick chat, YouTube chat, and Twitch chat. Nobody's in Twitch chat though. But there's 2 people on watching on Kick, and there's 5 on YouTube. But Miss Sonata, she's a public person in this, I guess. She's doing a text interview with me, and her and one of the other anti-Gamergate people, like, to play devil's advocate, like they're the only people willing to talk at all. Like you could say that like, oh, they're cowards, but like I'd rather them do a text interview, I guess, than like the radio silence I've gotten from most of the anti-GG people.
All right. Well, I misunderstood, and I'll admit that I'm wrong here. If they are private individuals who don't often talk to the media or talk to anybody, they just believe something, that's fine. I thought you were interviewing other streamers, other people that have put themselves out there. If you are interviewing, as I did during Gamergate, just people.
No, they're ordinary people, yeah.
Okay, well, so if you're not a public, I mean, there's actually different laws that apply to libel for public figures and public officials than there is for private citizens. So I will qualify what I said and apologize to them if they are. I just spoke without thinking. I just assumed they were like you. These are people that are out there in public posting their opinions. But if they're, if they don't have experience speaking, they might be nervous about that. They've never done it. I can understand not wanting to do that. And if in that case they're private individuals willing to speak to you, they actually deserve credit for that. However, if anybody is doing their own stream and chewing people up and spitting them out, and then they refuse to go on their stream, that is hypocritical and cowardly.
Yeah, I agree. And to their credit, the one person who's doing voice, unless I can convince the others to, which I'd love to do, Miss Sonata, you should do voice too. So should you, the other person. I'm not going to name since you're not public about being a part of the project yet. But the one person who is anti-GamerGate and like a YouTuber from back then, they don't do YouTube anymore, but they used to. They are doing voice. So Hannah
Well,
Zamora, you might know them.
Yes, I do remember that. Oh my God, that was one of the streams. I remember that name. Yes.
Yeah,
So look,
she went by Char42 a lot back then.
to me, I would just tell them and anybody that any chance to be interviewed on any stream, even if two people listen, it's just good skill to have to be able to talk on the fly. I mean, I'm not articulate. I'm a print person. I'm not in broadcast because obviously I can't talk very well. But if you learn how to do that, that is a skill. It makes you more fun at parties. And so I would urge anyone to be interviewed live if you could about something. And if you feel ambushed at a certain point, hang up. Say, look, I think you're ambushing me. I got ambushed. The last time I actually got ambush interviewed myself was by BuzzFeed about Gamergate. When I was doing Airplay, I think the story, I don't know if the story's still up, but BuzzFeed wrote a story about Airplay, and the reporter tried to play me, and I said, don't play me like this. I know what you're doing. Because it was one of those interviews like, hey, buddy, so what you're doing sounds so interesting. And I'm like, uh-huh. And so I know he's just gonna torpedo me afterwards. And the story was, and I had no problem with the story. It was I just had the problem that ran under BuzzFeed News. It wasn't news, it was his opinion, which is fine. Label it opinion. But so if you feel like you're getting like bullshitted, just say so and hang up. I didn't because I had nothing to lose. But if you've never done this before, I think it's better to do the interview live. And if you feel like you're being railroaded, just say that and hang up, and not do it at all. But I don't think you would do that anyway.
No, thank you. Well, I mean, I used to be like a partisan guy in GG. Like I was very partisan. Like I was like nice. I wasn't gonna like harass anybody, obviously. I guess except for the one time I harassed helicopter guy. But aside from that one incident, which we all agree was like horrible, like I was like a really good actor. Like but I was bad faith. Like I was like, oh, GamerGate is right about everything, or I wasn't willing to like concede ground where necessary and approach things in good faith. Like saying I don't know is like super great. Like nobody does that.
Well, that's why I liked Oliver Campbell so much, is that he was definitely opinionated. And those streams went on forever. It wasn't like they were really tight, but he also gave you time to talk and listen. And I don't know that, maybe he wasn't going to change his mind, but he was willing to let you try. And I just always appreciated that, for as strident as he was. And even Sargon, like, I don't know what he's up to now, but that conversation was very respectful and polite. So, you know, I think it's possible. I think, like I had this conversation with David Packman about, like, the shit you get for trying to be down the middle. And it's true. It's like, if you do your job right. My dad was an umpire for Little League when I was really young, and I would get really upset because the coaches would yell at him. And I remember he always told me, he said, "Son, it's as long as both coaches are yelling at me, it's okay." And that's the same thing about journalists. As long as both sides are yelling at you, fine. And that's why I appreciated Oliver, is that he was very opinionated. He didn't hide it, but he also didn't railroad you. And there must have been a great urge to do that, because when you believe something that strongly, to let people talk who don't agree with you, that is not an easy thing to do. And a lot of people can't do it. And if you can, that's a real big skill.
Well, Michael, what was GamerGate?
GamerGate was, to me, an opportunity to be an e-celeb. No, I'm kidding. I don't know what it's about. For me, it was a great way just to meet some people I would never ever meet. That's why I'm a journalist in the first place. That, and I can't do math. I've met some really amazingly weird people that I will never cross paths with again, and that happened in GamerGate, and I'm really appreciative of that. And I'm appreciative even of the mistakes I made, or mistakes of commission or omission, things I did or things I should have done. I'd rather make those mistakes than not to have tried. So I care less about people that said I didn't condemn harassment enough, or I didn't speak to them enough, because that is better than the alternative. I'd rather always, if I live by any creed, I'd rather make mistakes of commission than omission. I'd rather do something and fuck it up than not try. And I hope that, if you're going to be still continuing this conversation, that you live by that creed too.
Yeah, thanks. I want to try to. I ran these questions by anti-GamerGate people. Well, not yours actually, because I had to make a whole separate list of questions for you. But most of the questions that most people are getting, they were kind of reviewed by both sides, and to try and keep it fair. And I don't know, I try to push back on my own people. I don't know if Oron Darklord expected me to push back as much as I did, um, or Paulo Munoz. Do you remember Game Diviner? He was at your conference.
Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah, I interviewed him 3 days ago or something. I don't know when it was exactly. It's
Oh.
all blurring together now. But yeah, he actually wasn't super happy with the Rin the Forum for some reason. He thought he was biased against GG.
Well, what do you remember Andrew Eisen?
No, I don't think so. Were they
Super
pro or anti?
podcast. I don't know. I mean, I was on there a couple of times. It was a super action committee or something. It was just like one of those streams. It's a conversation. I don't think they really took much of a position either way, but no, I enjoyed. Those are the things I enjoyed. So
Well, has this conversation been fun?
yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting to go back and revisit it. I don't know if it's interesting for anyone else, but
You got a bunch of viewers. Well, I mean, a bunch for me, I guess I should say.
well, I'm curious what's going to happen now. I think your true value in this, or any of the people listening, isn't going to be now or next year. I think 10 years, 15 years, 20 years out, where does Gamergate fall in how everything else works? Because I think it was the first major online movement, and I think it's informed politics. I think it's informed campaigning of candidates. I think it's definitely informed journalism. So, like it or hate it, you want it to get. We need to get far enough away from it where the journalism fades and the historians take over. Because journalism is called the first draft of history, and first drafts always suck. So when you get far enough away from it where no one was involved in it, that's when you're objective enough to put it in its historical perspective. And I really do believe that there's a historical perspective for Gamergate. I know the people who hate Gamergate want to dismiss it as nothing but a stupid blip, a pimple on the ass of history, but I don't think that's true. I think you could still even hate it and admit that it had a ripple effect that's still going on today. And I am not smart enough or knowledgeable enough to to make that kind of analysis or have access to the people that can shed some light on it. Maybe you do. So the real value in the documentation of all of this stuff, and I know it's going to sound stupid and pompous, but politicians or historians later on are probably going to watch these old streams on a weird site called youtube.com that used to be big back in the day and um, draw inferences and lines out to where they are at that particular moment. So I really do believe that, there's some historical significance to this that isn't going to be really known for another decade or two. And I'll leave you with that pompous ass thought.
Thanks. I know you probably want to wrap this up soon. You mind if we take a few more questions?
No, no, I can go for 6 hours again.
uh,
No, I'm
I
kidding.
I wish you were right, and I hope you're right, and maybe you're right. But one of the anti-GamerGate's greatest victories was that because they poisoned the well, I think so much that like people like me, I deleted all my old stuff, and there's like not archives of most of it. I got like 2 videos from back then, maybe like 4 actually, out of like 400 that I did, or like 300 maybe. Like it's they because we don't want our real life names associated with this because I wanted to be a normal person. I wanted to have like a normal job after college, and like I didn't want it to hurt my reputation because they lied about us so much. And a lot of other people I talked to, I was talking to Lisa, I interviewed her. She said the same thing. I was talking with Lord Nurgle. He's another big GamerGate guy. Like he's taken all of his stuff private. A bunch of us have because we're scared. And a lot of that stuff, once it's gone forever.
Well, then make copies of it and document it now, man. I mean, if this stuff's important to you, then someone's going to look at it later and they're going to draw some conclusions. I mean, it's amazing what people like what we do now, like the history that we look at from 100 to 200 years ago. I can tell you that historians use old newspapers from the 1800s and 1900s to inform their perspective of history, and I can guarantee you that the uneducated, low-paid social rejects who were writing a news story in 1902 did not think that the story they were writing about was going to be in a history book 100 years later. So I really do believe that YouTube is going to be scraped by historians looking for trends. And whatever you think of Gamergate, shit show or not, it informed something. It did something. It's still going on. I don't know that they're going to listen to all 6 hours of my stream from Oliver Campbell.
Now,
I
one
like to comment, if the interview lasts longer than 6 hours, contact the physician immediately.
that was from Game Diviner from Airplay, I believe. New
Yeah.
Game Diviner. Now,
I
obviously.
did go to the bathroom 3 times during that 6 hour stream.
By the way, if you need a bathroom break at any point, let me know. We'll probably be wrapping up in like the next like I don't know half hour, whatever, or whatever you feel
Half
comfortable with.
hour?
Hour? I don't know, whatever you want.
Oh, Jesus, man. All right. Well, go ahead. Ask me the rest of the questions because I don't want to be here that long. Not
Okay.
that I don't like you, but I'm older now than I was back then. I can't do it.
Hey, we can go as long as you want or short as you want. But I deleted everything. Someone in the chat says taking off YouTube is temporarily. Yeah, no, I wish I didn't. Um, gosh. Well, you did all this stuff. You did AirPlay. Wait. I want to say that I respect what you did, and Lynn Walsh too, and Rin LaForme. And I've been talking with Lynn Walsh about this project. I'd like to
Oh, great.
interview her, but I don't know if she's willing to do it or not. But but I really respect what you did and what Lynn Walsh did and what even Rin LaForme, which I invited him to the interview as well, but he didn't reply.
Well, they have respectable jobs and so maybe they don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's yeah. But anyway, you did all this stuff. You got the truth out about Gamergate, is what some people say, and it didn't do anything. Nothing mattered. Nothing changed. The media narrative
Really?
remains the same.
The media narrative about Gamergate remains the same, or the things that you complained about didn't get any better,
Well,
or both?
the former.
Well, if the goal of Gamergate was for Gamergate to be respected, you're right, that didn't happen. But if that's the goal, it's a pretty shitty goal. If the goal was to change what everyone else thinks about issues that, like social justice and for Milo feminism or whatever, that you're right, that didn't happen either because, political parties can't do it. Gamergate wasn't going to do it. If the idea was more narrow, which, maybe didn't interest a lot of Gamergaters, but if it was to change the way that the gaming media covered them, that was very successful. One, Kotaku and Polygon did come up with ethics policies when they initially refused to do it, which we were like, well, how can you argue against an ethics policy? Two, they clamped down on a lot of the practices that they were doing that were pointed out. And three, it launched a bunch of independent people to start their own media outlets. The reason I think Gamergate people aren't happy, or any movement is unhappy, is that you never actually get recognized as winning. No one ever says it's because of your journalists know this. It's never because of your story. When someone wins a Pulitzer Prize and uncovers a chemical company dumping chemicals in a stream and causing cancer in a low-income community, they never say like, "Oh man, you got me. We're changing because of that story." It's always, "Well, we have new corporate management and we decided that nothing was really wrong, but we're going to change it anyway." Like, you never, as a journalist, get the satisfaction of someone saying, "Oh man, you got me." Never happens. So you just have to, as a journalist, look at the results. Well, did they fix it? Are they still polluting that river? No. Well, let's go get a beer because we won. Gamergate is never going to get anyone to admit that they had an impact in a positive way. It's just never going to happen. But you have to look at, were there any positive impacts? There are a lot of negative impacts, and I don't approve of any of those. So when people tell me, if I say, as often as happened, well, there have been some positive impacts. Well, you're gainsaying all of the negative ones. Like, no, I couldn't do anything about that. If my job wasn't journalism, but something else, and I could actually stop the harassment, if that was my job, I would definitely try to do that. My job as a journalist, all I can do in Gamergate is what I'm trained to do. And that's what we focused on. That's what some people in Gamergate said they were about. Some people lied and used it as as an excuse to do other things, which is fine. But I think Gamergate had some success. I just don't think it's a success that many of them, as much success as they wanted or where they necessarily wanted it. But it didn't do nothing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you've picked up, but like I wasn't a big games journalism guy. I was more on the creative freedom side. So, and I actually think we did have some successes there. Actually, I think that there was like this for a time, and maybe you disagree. I disagree probably on that. That's fine. I actually, um, that's good that we have these disagreements. But like, I think that like there was like this attempt to stifle the artistic freedom of game developers through like these social media campaigns and like petitions to get games banned from stores, like we saw in Australia. And I think that Gamergate stood up to that. I think that was like a victory because like that stuff largely went away. I feel, and I feel like the localization practices of companies have gotten like better for the most part. Whereas like the games are getting like butchered when they come over from Japan, where they take out like half the content, which they did in the past with like Ace Combat 3 and Fire Emblem Fates and Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Like I feel like that's gotten a bit better. So like I think there have been victories, and like on the ethics
Oh, okay.
side,
I think Kotaku covered that. That's the stuff I think they did really well. I would defend, like, some Gamergaters would say Kotaku sucks. I hate Kotaku. And it would be the same thing as Gamergate. Kotaku sucks. All of it sucks. Nothing in Kotaku is good. I'm like, oh, if I find one good story in Kotaku, then you're wrong. And I found
Yeah.
a lot of good stories because they would cover what you just talked about. They would send people to Japan. They would do that kind of journalism. It was when the stories got look when someone said what search Gamergate and in Google, what do you get? I'm looking that up now, and I just remembered this story. The Washington Post, the only guide to Gamergate you'll ever need to read. October 14th, 2014. One of the worst stories because that's the dumbest headline. I mean, no journalist should write the only guide. But I also think I'm trying to remember if I've seen the Washington Post do anything that's stupid since. And I think the answer is probably no. So, but they're never going to admit that. So, I think it had that effect. Indirectly, they ended up hiring gaming journalists to cover stuff. So, you know, but you're right. If I look at that page, there are some major media outlets that wrote about this: NPR, Guardian, but they're really columns. They're not stories, and I don't blame those outlets for doing that because it was too hard to do the story and it's easier to do the column. So,
All right. Well, hey, I know you said you got to go. I want to be respectful of your time. But I do have could we do like a lightning round real quick with like just a few final thoughts
sure,
here? Okay, so I
yeah,
did bring up this earlier. I said I was going to bring up the anti-gamer gators question from the kick chat. I didn't actually do it, but they wanted to know what you think of what some GamerGate people said is they think that some people in Gamergate said that they wanted quote unquote objective reviews. And what they meant by that, I guess most of them seem to have meant by that is they want the reviewers to tell them, hey, look, this game here, it's got good graphics, it's got good gameplay, the story's pretty good, whatever, right? Whatever. Um, but they don't want the political critique mixed in with that. And you can have the political critique separate, some people would say. Like you can have like an article talking about the politics and like, oh, this game is sexist, this game is Marxist, this game is too capitalist, whatever, right? You could have that as a separate article, but it shouldn't be in the review. Um, do you think that Gamer Gators were onto anything about the quote unquote objective review stuff?
no, yeah. I had this conversation at the time too, and the problem isn't that review. The problem is the lack of genetic diversity. If Kotaku and Polygon want to write those kind of reviews, it's their business. They should be able to do it. The problem is there should be other sites reviewing the games from a totally different, from the other political perspective. There should be a review that is totally just nuts and bolts. Tell me about the gameplay. Shut the fuck up. The problem was there were only a couple of very large gaming media outlets. So when they do the same thing, that's what sucked. If Polygon and Kotaku were totally opposite, the MSNBC and Fox News of the gaming press, you wouldn't hear that argument because there'd be something for everybody. The problem was there was just that. And the biggest, I think a lot of the anger stemmed from just this lack of genetic diversity in the gaming press. There needed to be at least three major outlets. One that was just the facts, ma'am. One that was totally social justice, and one that was totally I like big tits and big guns. And all of those would be totally legit sites. And then Anita Sarkeesian could rail against big tits and big guns, and people would be mad at her, and there would be a healthy debate, but no one would threaten her because they wouldn't feel the need to have to do that. Well, some assholes always would because there's always a criminal class and they're assholes. But generally speaking, that you could have a robust debate without getting really, really, frustrated because you knew there was a place where you could go to have that argument and a place you could go to read people refuting the argument. Because let's face it, when you go read or watch a stream that agrees with you, you're like, yeah, I agree with that. But when you watch a debate where your side scores a point against the other side, you're like, fuck yeah. God damn it, that's awesome. Like you get really, that's amazing. like your team just scored a touchdown, right? And if the other side makes a point, you get really mad and defensive, and you might have a sleepless night because, like, well, there's got to be a way to refute that. But over time, you might actually alter your worldview just a little bit. And just like the journalists never hear that they won, you never admit to yourself that you actually changed your mind. You just over time, you just incorporate part of a new belief into your belief system, but you're never going to admit that someone changed your mind, but you soften your view and then you just attribute it to age. Because I'm old now, right? Like, oh, you soften your opinions with age. No, you don't. Age doesn't do anything different. It just makes it harder to pee and harder to get up in the morning. What really happens is you just hear more shit over time and it just sinks in, and enough time has to pass between the time you heard it and the time you now believe it so that you don't remember that you're giving someone else credit for affecting your opinion. You just changed because you aged and you got wiser. But without all that debate, you just get old and stupid.
Okay, I got the last 4 questions. And question
Sorry,
1.
it's my fault for not answering them tighter.
No, you're fine. You're doing actually phenomenal. I love this. This is great. First off, I want you to critique me a bit. Do GamerGate people like me downplay the harassment?
Um,
Based on what you've heard me say here, I guess.
no, I wouldn't say you downplay it. I think you face a no-win situation. I think everyone does when you have to decry your own movement. I face the same thing when I argue about Israel with people, because I have a lot of progressive friends that hate Israel, and I'm like, all right. I mean, I totally get it. I can see why. And then if you admit that your side does things wrong, the problem is that I need to wrap that up and go argue the other points. And it looks like you're not giving enough. You're not giving enough of yourself. You don't feel enough about the other side, because now you're going to go off and talk about the things you want to talk about. I don't think there's any way that you can. I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know how often you have to acknowledge harassment to keep talking about other things. You know what I mean? It's kind of like when someone dies and you're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and then you're like, "But I'm hungry and I want to go eat." Like, life does go on. So I don't. I'm still learning how to do this, and I learned it from sources I interviewed. I don't know how you admit your side did wrong sincerely enough, and how often you have to do it so that people know you're being serious. But at a certain point, you have to stop saying that because you have other current issues to still delve into. So I believe you, but I don't know if that's because I kind of know you a little bit. Or some people just are really bad at being sincere. I don't know, but I believe that you believe that. And I think that's good. I don't know if other people hearing you or me believe it, because people have still told me to this day that you didn't condone harassment enough and you were only aiding and abetting them and you must not care. I'm like, no, I care. I mean, if I fucked up by not saying it enough, I don't know there's no formula for it. So I don't know. But at a certain point, I have to stop talking about Zoe Quinn and Brianna Wu, because that's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk about the journalism. So I need to acknowledge that, shut it down, not engage with it, and move on. But so if I move on, it's not because I don't care. It's because I'm agreeing with you. That is a conundrum, and I don't know that I learned that lesson then. I don't know that I know it any better now.
Okay, some GamerGate people say that. Sorry, some anti-GamerGate people have written articles saying that GamerGate caused Trump, or like the alt-right pipeline idea. Have you seen that at all? What do you think?
Oh yeah. Well, the argument that, like, Trump didn't cause this either. Trump was an opportunist who capitalized on, like, Trump didn't create that which got him elected. People felt that, latched on to him, and so if you believe that, because otherwise you're crediting Donald Trump with suddenly informing 40 million people about their beliefs, then I think it's equally ridiculous to say Gamergate caused that. Gamergate, if you want to make that argument, you could say was perhaps the first online movement to congeal it, right? I mean, you had the Tea Party in real time, in person, congealing that first sentiment. And then you could maybe maybe historians will make an argument that Gamergate presaged the online version of the Trump movement, or that kind of political movement. So I can see that, but I don't think Gamergate caused that. How would that even work? It's a leaderless movement, by your own definition. So a bunch of people got involved in it for a whole bunch of their own motives. Some were the reason that Gamergate started. Some weren't. People made their own definitions out of it. But yeah, I think maybe historians will make the argument that the two congealing factors for Trump was the Tea Party, which was older, and the Gamergate movement, which was younger. One was in person, in protests. They met in restaurants. The other met only online. But that's what I'm talking about. That's what historians would then argue about by pulling archival footage of everything on YouTube to prove their point, because historians love to debate.
Can I ask a very brief follow up? And you could go as short or brief, long as you want. But do you think most of the people involved were right wing or left wing or like moderate or like what?
I think the loudest people were right wing, for sure.
Well, that's like the
I
GTA
think
Revolt crowd, though. Like, I mean, out of like normal GamerGate people, I mean.
um, some of them told me they were libertarian, but I don't know if they knew what that meant. Um, Several told me they were anarchists, but then they were arguing about how the panel to set up the panel should be set up. That doesn't seem very anarchistic. Um, I would say a lot of them were younger people that, when people, and I deal with college students because I still, I said I volunteer at a student newspaper. And I think at that age, your politics are emotional. Like you respond more to hating something than understanding something enough to like. So I think for Gamergate, if I had to guess where most of those people are today on the political spectrum, I would say that they're more Republican than Democrat.
Okay. All
It's a
right.
guess, though.
Do you have any favorite moments during your time back then?
My favorite moment was during the bomb threat. Um, we were standing outside. It was hot as hell, like 200% humidity. And there was a reporter, guy Mike, from the Palm Beach Post, which is a newspaper actually pretty close to Trump's house in West Palm Beach. And he just was on his phone and he tweeted out, he didn't know what was really going on. He said, Gamergate called the bomb threat. And and he used the hashtag. And I was walking around handing out bottled water to people because it was so hot. And I could see in real time people like, what the fuck? And I don't even remember who it was now. Someone I kind of knew walked up to me and said, who is this? I'm going to say his last name. Who's Mike? This guy. What the fuck is this? And I'm like, okay, hold on. He's a reporter for the Palm Beach Post. He's a little older than me. He doesn't understand any of this stuff. He popped into some of this to Airplay because he was there for the rest of the convention, the conference. He doesn't know what he just did. He doesn't know the shitstorm that's about to hit him. If anyone figures out that he's standing here right now. So I'm going to go take you over. Let's walk over to him and you can talk to him. But this is just like Airplay, man. Like you can go yell at him and you'll feel better. But he'll have learned nothing except you're a dick. That's going to be his conclusion. So we can walk over there and you can talk to him and explain that GamerGate wouldn't call it a bomb threat to Airplay. That's not how this really works. And then you need to explain yourself really succinctly and tightly, like you're having a beer in a bar and you want to tell an interesting story. And so we walk over there and kind of walk over, stomping in the beginning, and they got there, and I'm like, Mike, this is, and he's like, what did I do? Because he was looking at all the responses. I said, well, this guy's going to explain it to you. And I went back around with the water. By the time I came back around, they were having a very animated but polite conversation. And afterwards, he's like, that was weird. And I was like, well, did it suck? He's like, no, it was actually pretty good, but Jesus Christ, this is so he actually learned more in that conversation than he did from watching Milo Yiannopoulos talk for 10 minutes.
Well, nobody learns from Milo Yiannopoulos talking for 10 minutes. But what's funny is I actually heard the same exact story, like almost verbatim, like 3 days ago from the person who you talked with, Paulo Munoz. He's in the chat, by the way. But the person, it was one of his favorite moments too. I think that was one of he brought it up. He brought it up actually. I don't know if it was his favorite moment. He was something else.
All right, I knew it was someone I knew it was someone I knew, but I was really hot and sweaty. I don't remember. So it was him. Okay, I didn't want to say it and then not have it not be right. So yes, it was. That must have been that conversation, and I hope I recounted it accurately. But I remember walking back around and they were just talking. So I guess that was one of them, and 1B would be taking over the carport of a condemned house across from this historic meeting center and continuing the conversation there. Milo was already left because I think he was afraid the humidity was going to affect his hair. But a number of other people stuck around, and we just continued this conversation in a carport, a condemned carport. Like we just kind of trespassed onto this property, and the cops were milling about for the bomb threat, and they just kind of looked at us, and we kind of looked at them. And I think I told one of the reporters, because there were some TV reporters there, I said, well, the bomb threat's illegal and trespassing in a condemned house is illegal, so they cancel each other out, it's legal. Isn't that how math works? You add two negative numbers together, it's positives. So those were my two best moments, and they were both during a bomb threat.
Well, I was going to ask other questions, but we could throw those out because this is more interesting. What was said during the part that nobody got to see? Or I guess it was a private conversation, so maybe you should tell me. I don't know.
What part?
After the bomb threats came in, what you guys continued the conversation? Was there anything interesting that was discussed?
Oh, they actually recorded it. Someone posted it.
I think I saw that at the time. I saw that like contemporaneously. So the whole thing, right? Or no?
Yeah. The only conversation that happened that I don't think I ever told anyone about is that Milo actually did leave with Kathy, and I said, well, we're going to continue the conversation, and Milo, he wasn't impolite about it, but he's like, he said something, and I don't remember the exact words now. I did at the time, but he said something like, "There's nothing left for me here," and he just left. And I just thought, like, that was just, and Kathy left too, and I understand and it just struck me because like Kathy and Milo were two of the three people on the afternoon panel, and neither of them seemed particularly interested in the movement that chose them. So I mean, Milo, sure, but Kathy too. Like she was very proud of her base mom sort of moniker.
Oh, you mean Christina Hoff Sommers or Kathy?
Sorry, Christina. Sorry, see, this is my memory.
I'm interviewing both of them actually coming up.
Well, Christina would be interesting. What was it? Was Ash Scow or whatever?
Yeah, I'm interviewing her too. If her media people allow it, she's in talks with them too, because she works for like a major site now.
Well, she's really on the ball, and she knows her shit, and she cared about the issues. Christina, what do I call her? Kathy? Oh, because Kathy was the other. All right, so Christina and Milo, they were buds. They left together before the whole thing started, and we were backstage and eliciting promises of like be brief. Um, it was weird to me that like GamerGate was so adamant about the panel to select a panel, and these were their champions, and it just struck me that like most of them, the two of them, out of the six people they had, those two were just not really there, because the afternoon panel was supposed to be about how should online movements communicate their message better. Like you said, you're a leaderless movement. So if you want to stay that way, what can we do better? Like what can reporters do better, and what can you do better? How can we meet better in the middle and cover these things? Journalism. I mean, I'm defending journalism obviously during Airplay, but I'm not an idiot. I know that journalism needs to evolve with the world, right? I mean, journalism got its real big start with telegraphs, during the Civil War. That's when it really took off. So now we're in the internet age. And so what does journalism have to do to adapt? We're not going to sell out our values, but we got to do some shit. And then what can you guys do as a leaderless movement to do better? Because you just can't, oh, we're leaderless, figure it out, motherfucker. Like you can't do that.
I feel like we
So,
tried hard, but we
well, but
disagree.
like that, but that was where I was coming from, because I couldn't figure it out. But instead, it became Christina and Milo talking about none of that, like having their own agenda. So, and then when they left, I really and Mark Seb is still there, and Ash is still there, and they're in a sweaty carport in a condemned house. Like them or hate them, agree with their viewpoints or don't. You have to admire people that believe enough in what they said they were going to do, that during a bomb threat, and this is Florida in summertime, man. I mean, I cannot begin. It is not a dry heat, right? There's no way you're just totally soaked in sweat. There were people literally pouring bottled water over their head, and you're thinking like, well, that's going to get them all wet. Like they're already wet. You might as well be cooler and wet. So for them to stick around, and there's 20 people listening in the carport, because it's not like a lot of people fit in there. And there's one dude with his own camera, and you're still having that conversation. And Lynn Walsh was there. So like, those are the people that most impressed me, because like or hate what they're saying, you can't argue with their commitment.
Yeah, I didn't know that about Christina Hoff Summers. I'm interviewing her on Saturday. I guess I'll have to bring this up. Um,
Yeah, well, tell her you can bring it up by saying, and I've just said it, and it's recorded. Um, but yes, they left together during the bomb threat, and I'd be interested to hear your recording to see how she responds to that, and how she responds to what I'm saying. I'm not saying anything negative about her personally. I'm saying
I
I
mean, it
don't
is
believe.
negative because I think it does reflect poorly on her as a person. And I'm
Well,
not look.
well,
Maybe she's gonna back out of the interview now. If she wants to, she can. But that's cowardice. I think we should still do the interview. But I'm
well,
gonna bring it
I
up.
hope she still does the interview, but it's possible. Like I can't blame her. I don't blame her for anything she did at Airplay the way I blame Milo, because Milo spoke for literally minutes on end without letting other people talk. That's just wrong to your own side. Christina just didn't. She talked a little too much too, but she just she didn't really monopolize anything. She just didn't say anything particularly interesting. But that's on the GamerGate side, because they were coordinating with their own speakers. So it's but both of them are reading prepared text. So both of them kind of lied to me backstage. They like, we're going to be tight about this. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, Milo is an open book. I don't know enough about Christina's life. I mean, she
Yeah, I
seems
don't. I'm not
accomplished.
gonna make assumptions or anything. Like I'm on good terms with her. I've talked with her a few times. Like we're not like
All right.
super
Well, she's
close or anything.
obviously smart, but I definitely think that
She
she
should have
was
stayed. That's really
disingenuous.
disrespectful to the GamerGate community.
Well, yeah, I mean, if anybody should, I mean, you guys should be mad about
Yeah.
it. But I can understand at the time, these are people on your side, so you can't call out your own side because you're passionate in the moment. But in retrospect, if you're looking at Airplay as a moment in time, I don't think your side was particularly well represented in that afternoon panel. I think you were better represented in the morning panel with people, controlling their passion, giving examples of the gaming press doing things that weren't appropriate, and getting journalists who have no horse in this race to say, yeah, that ain't good. And then the afternoon panel, all you end up doing by speechifying is not only not representing your side, pissing off everyone in the room is like, what the fuck is this? And then not being, it's like, not only did people not understand what he was saying, they just hated him because he was not letting anyone else talk. And therefore, and then when your side was saying, well, let him talk, you're like, well, okay, now I know these guys are dicks. So people just didn't have any understanding of the situation, automatically hated your side based on their only interaction that they had with you. And you could argue, well, maybe they should go online and spend 6 hours figuring it out. No, that's not even their job. This is their free time. This is their Saturday for continuing education training as a journalist. They stroll into this afternoon panel. Some of them were not in the morning panel. They only showed up for the afternoon panel because they were in sessions in the morning. And they stroll in, and that's the first thing they hear is Milo and Christina reading shit. They were there for a conversation, and they're getting a lecture. And, so if you want to blame anybody for like anything, I think you know who to blame, because that was the whole point, right? To convince, don't preach to the converted. You have new people here. Convince them of the rightness of your way. And then you have those two up there reading shit. It doesn't work for me, but it didn't work for those people. But, and I wasn't, like I said, I was frustrated because I wanted to have a conversation. I wasn't mad about it because, like I said, I had no horse in this race. And I told other reporters, I told Polygon and I told Datillo that that perfectly encompassed GamerGate to me. The morning panel being very focused on journalism and ethics, and coming to some conclusion, and the afternoon panel being a shit show. That totally encompassed everything I experienced in GamerGate.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you so much for doing this, Michael. And I do hope that, well, actually, you know what? Have you seen? You might not. You got to be aware of this, right? There's a documentary about Airplay coming out.
Is it finally coming out? I was told about that a long ass time
Well,
ago.
it's been completed. I've gotten a private copy. Um, I've not
Is that
finished
the one
watching
with
it yet.
is that the one with part 1 and part 2?
Yeah.
I saw part 1. They showed me part 1. And I asked my opinion, and I just gave my honest opinion, which was, it wasn't as tight as a journalist or a true documentary needs to be. I mean, there were some interesting things in there, but if the goal of that document, like I was trying to ask, because every journalist, the number one question is, what is your target audience? Like, who is it for? If it's for people that were in Gamergate or tangentially connected to it, I think it's fine. If the goal of it is for people that never knew what it was, I think it gets back to the central reason there was Airplay in the first place, which is, what the fuck is it? So there's so many parts of it where it delves into so much history that has nothing to do with Gamergate, but the reasons that it happened, and those parts kind of wander, So it's like watching a bad movie that you're like, wait a minute, what's the subplot now? Like, why are we in Brazil? Like, how did we get there? Like, I thought this, like those kind of movies. So, where the central story kind of veers off, and like you have to get all the backstory. So, and that's hard to do. I'm not running it down, because that's what journalists
Yeah,
struggle with
he's
that
in
all
the
the time. You
chat,
write a
by the way.
story. Well, I mean, it was an ambitious. I mean, I think I said this at the time. It's ambitious. It's the B-roll is impressive. Like it's all but 2 parts. I don't know that that the average person is going to get it. I think it's kind of what we talked about just a few minutes ago. I think that documentary will be watched by historians because not only does it have footage that will be important, but it also it kind of sums up the attitude of Gamergate. So I think it's like, it's going to sound really weird, but it's like this, I'm making this really pompous. So in Roman history, like I love Roman history, right? So sometimes like Aristotle, like everyone knows who Aristotle is, but we have no actual works of Aristotle. We have his notes and what other people said he said. And that's how you have to reconstruct Aristotle. It's not like he did publish things to be read by other people. We got none of that shit. We got his notes and what other people quoted him as saying in their books. I consider things like what you're doing in that documentary will be the things that people will draw from because the footage that's in that documentary, some of that is already probably gone. Some of it's no longer available or will not be available. What someone might find that documentary, might not even find your stuff or my stuff, and will have to use that to reconstruct what happened back here. We think we live in this age where everything is documented. I was online in the 90s and none of that shit's around. So I think that documentary significance is maybe not what the producer intended, but it could conceivably be very significant.
Cool. Well, hey, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
God, no.
I could go for like 6 hours. This has been great. But I do really appreciate you doing this, Michael. Actually, you know what? I will say this: like, out of all of the people that I've interacted with during GamerGate, and I've made a lot of friends, and I made some enemies. Though I don't really think of them as my enemies, but they think of me as one maybe. But you're probably one of the people I have the most respect for because like what you did with the airplay stuff, and you had like no reason to do it aside from like finding out the truth. That's like the only real reason. Um, all the incentives were aligned against you doing this. I appreciate that you took the time and to do it, to hear our story and put it out there. And maybe that story is more complicated and more nuanced than the Gamergate people believe. It probably is, but it's also a hell of a lot more nuanced than what the media said.
That's true. Well, I will. I'm going to have to now check out if Christina does an interview with you or you interview other participants because now I want to hear their recollections and journalistically see if my memories match up with their recollections. And I'll just leave you with this thought. Everyone donate to my Patreon account. Just kidding. I don't have one. I just...
Well, yeah, I'm doing Ash Scow, Kathy Young, Christina Hoff Summers. I'm
Kathy
trying to
Young,
get.
that's who I was thinking of. I always got them confused. Okay. I need to listen to some of these. I need to subscribe
Subscribe
now.
to my channel. Like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff, all the YouTuber stuff that people say. But yeah, I'm trying to get Lynn Walsh. I'm trying to get Ren Lapointe or whatever. Lynn LaForm.
Ren LaForm.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to say his name wrong. And I'm trying to get Mark. Maybe you could help me. Maybe you could reach out to Mark, but he's so jaded on all this stuff. He really is.
Oh, that's too bad. I mean, I like that guy.
I like him too. He's great. But like honestly, like it's like this. He's like the greatest. Uh, I was gonna say he's like the greatest victim of GamerGate. Uh, because like he so truly believed in all this stuff and got crushed by it. Um, but I feel like there's optimism, Mark, and you should come on and you should do the book because I think you have a really interesting perspective that I want to hear, and I think other people want to hear it too. And I think the fact that you're so fucking jaded about all this shit, and like you just are so disappointed, I think that that's part of the story, and that's a part of the
I think
story
so
that
too.
we're not getting because I'm talking with Michael, I'm talking with all these pro GG people, a handful of anti GG people, like most of them they all have their perspective on this, and it's all like, oh, Gamergate was great, some bad actors of course, but we condemn them, whatever, blah 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 blah, right? And then like Gamergate was bad because like the fruit of the poisonous tree or whatever. Like you have people on both sides have their opinions, but like yours is I think an interesting perspective, and I really want to hear it. And maybe you'll be watching this and you'll be like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna do the interview. Or maybe you'll be like, why are you calling me out, bro? Maybe it'll be that too. I don't know.
I hope he does it. I think it's always good. I think it's good to have a conversation. Doesn't matter how many people are listening. Sometimes just having the conversation makes you congeal your own thoughts. So I am going to listen to the rest of these interviews. It's been a long time since Airplay, and I don't trust my own recollections. Um, I trust their impressions, but not all the particular facts unless I take notes, and I wasn't taking notes. So if you interview these other people, Derek Smart would be interesting to talk to too, as a game developer, what his impressions of that time was. But I definitely want to hear the other interviews you do, and I'm glad you're doing it. I'm glad documentaries being made. And I hope if you can look at anything optimistically, it's simply the fact that without Gamergate, I don't know that there would be as many people now producing their own media. And as a journalist, I believe that's always a good thing.
Yeah, I mean I honestly part of the project when I first started considering doing it, what I wanted to do was like to change the narrative on this a bit because like I think it's bullshit that me and my friends were called misogynistic harassers and still are, and I wanted to fix the record on that. But like now, like part of me still wants. I mean, obviously I still want that to happen, but like that's not the objective. The objective is just to tell people stories and to hear them out. And um, I I want to get a cross sample, but I actually considered interviewing some of the trolls, like the actual like third party trolls, because they're still around. Some of them are. In fact, some of them are still trolling us to this day. Um,
Sure, why not try it?
but like, well, all they're gonna do is either one come on here and be like, "Oh, I love GamerGate. GamerGate was about harassing all the women I wanted. It was so like they're gonna be like trolling the fuck out of us. It's not gonna be a
It'll
good
be
faith interview, right?
educational. Yeah, I mean, look, I talked to some of the trolls as I could, and um, I tried to reach out to the guy that said I sucked camel dicks because I wanted to know what he had against camels. But it's funny, the trolls are often the ones that don't want to talk, which is weird to me. Which is why Airplay was in person, because if they were going to show up, they wouldn't be trolling. They'd have to listen. So if you can get them to talk to you, I think that's worth it.
But also at the same time, if I reach out to these people, and like there were different levels of trolls. Like there were trolls who just like fucked around for fun, and there's like trolls that actually did like terrible shit, like dox people and stuff, right? Um, but like some of these people, like they actually did harass people. If I talk with them, these third party trolls, or even like someone in GamerGate who like crossed the line, or anti GT who crossed the line, um, aren't I like de facto like doing? They're doing it for attention, right? That's why they're trolling. And if they're in a book and on a live stream talking about how they sent a death threat to Brianna Wu or whatever, like, isn't that giving them the attention that they wanted and justifying their trolling?
It depends. I mean, if you talk to them, one, I wonder if it's years later, and I know a lot of these, at least the ones that I knew were kids, they were teenagers. I wonder if they kind of regret that now that they're older. And if they don't, like I've interviewed like white supremacists before journalistically, and it wasn't to give them a platform. It was to try to give everyone else an understanding of why they're like they are. So you just have to, I mean, that's the hard part of journalism. You have to make sure you don't romanticize them, but you help give some intel and their thinking so that they can be, neutralized. So if you get those trolls and you interview them, you just have to make sure the interview is tight. I'm sure you've listened to, presidential debates that go off the rails because the moderators aren't being very journalistic. They're losing control of the interview. I lost control of the Milo interview. But if you can control it, then you're maybe going to get some insight into why they did what they did, and why they thought GG was an easy mark. So I would, as long as you can control the interview, as long as you have faith in your own skills, then But yeah, if you fuck it up, you're giving them a free platform. That's the danger of journalism, man. But make a mistake of commission, not omission.
Man, now I'm gonna have to reach out to them. And like some of these people were like legit bad people. So, but I guess I'll have
That
to
they
do it.
probably still are.
It's part of. Well, I mean, maybe some of them probably like moved on. Like, and like maybe like some of them have regretted it, but the people who regretted it aren't the ones who are still around trolling 10 years later.
Well, well, good luck, and I'm going to listen to the other interviews now, and I'll be the one posting comments and questions.
All right, sounds good. Hey, and of course, if you ever want to talk sometime, I'm going to be a political streamer. That's one thing that I want to do. So if you want to talk politics or something, or like interview me about GG or whatever, I don't know, anything you want. Um, just hop
Well,
in
how
my
about
Discord,
this?
send me a DM, email, whatever.
You are going to be political streamer. You're going to be doing journalism. SPJ will help you. You don't have to be a member. We don't care about that. We care about the journalism, not the dues. So when you get that really going, hit me up and let's talk about how you're doing that. And if you want some advice or help or critique, journalists are supposed to critique each other. That's one thing we do. It's not always fun, but it makes shit better. So
Yeah. Oh, was
if
I
you want
too
to do it,
biased?
this is your. This is a totally different thing, man. This is your interview, and this is fine. I'm. But if you're going to do something else, I'm interested to know. So
Okay. Well, hey,
let's
yeah,
talk.
I might take you up on that, but I'm not. I'll have to remember. I'll have to remember to reach out to you. But especially since I'm gonna have a lot of questions. And like the new media people, they're terrible. You talk about how the old press gets stuff wrong, but like at least they had some degree of standards, even if they like were not great and not perfect. But like the new media people, they're even worse. Like the streamer people, they don't do any research. It's horrible in this community. Like the new media is like people just they turn off their brains. They're like, oh well, Fox News lied to me or CNN lied to me, so now I'm gonna go trust everything that Tim Pool says, or I'm gonna go trust everything that Hassan says or whatever. It's worse than the old press.
That's why if you do it right, I think you'll be you'll be different, and people. I won't say they'll flock to it, but you'll get enough smart people, and that's the audience you want. So I do believe that journalism is just good, greedy business at a basic level. I mean, opinions are only going to take you so far. At some point, you do journalism, more people will listen, you'll make money. Newspapers weren't newspapers for past couple centuries because publishers were committed to journalism. They wanted to make money, and they realized that if you do objective journalism, objective as you can, um, you get people from both parties because they know that. Look, people only get mad, really mad, at stories they think the other side is gonna believe. So the reason that people hate the mainstream media, like fuck the New York Times and the Washington Post, but if they do an investigation into your candidate, you get so mad because you think it sounds convincing enough that other people are going to believe it. You don't get as mad at a streamer on YouTube because you're like, oh, what a fucking joke. What a clown. No one's going to believe this. And you might hate it, but you don't get really deep down mad about it. You get deep down mad about shit that you, if you admit it to yourself, sounds pretty good and you don't like it. So if you can do journalism that pisses off people for the right reason, they will keep coming back or they'll keep commenting and engaging because they want to persuade you and anyone paying attention that you're wrong. And then you get to say, hey, man, I was just quoting some other people. People that tell me that they don't like what was said at Airplay. I said, did I say it? No, I didn't like what your panelist said. Oh, I have no, I'm not responsible for that. They're their own people. So your issue is with them, not with me. Well, you gave them a platform. That's right. I did. You can be mad at me for the platform, but you're mad at them for what they said. So you give people a platform and you try to keep it as you do a better job than I did with Milo, you'll be a success.
Well, thank you. And as you say, there's nothing more hypocritical than a thin-skinned journalist. So I'm gonna have to reach out to one of those trolls and see if they're
All right.
willing to come on and tell their story.
All right, man. Good luck.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for watching, everybody. It was great. I could have gone for like way longer, but I'm really glad that we did this. And holy cow, I've got like a ton of viewers on Kick. Can I even raid anybody? Stardust is live and Food Shops is live. I'm not gonna raid I'll raid Stardust, I guess. After she attacked me. But that's part of the business, I guess. And on YouTube, I'll raid Tomfoolery? Yeah. So go say hi to Tom. Go say hi to Stardust. And on Twitch, I'll raid Amelia. So go say hi to them. Tell them Tachyon Blue sent you. It's good networking for me. Have a good night, everyone.